They made her sit in the corner of the table, like an old, worn-out ornament that no one wanted to look at. Her son, a powerful CEO, took the $50 savings check she'd given her grandson and laughed mockingly in front of everyone. His wife feigned pity, and her grandson, the child she loved more than life itself, was taught to look at her as a burden. But that night, the old woman quietly went down to her basement room and opened a file that could wipe everything out. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit subscribe now and turn on notifications, because stories like this are only for those who listen to the end. Like and leave a comment letting me know which city or country you're watching from. I want to know how far my story has traveled in this world. I have been sitting at this table for 47 years. Not this particular table, this one is new, a 12-seat monstrosity Marcus had imported from Italy at a cost I never asked about because I knew the number would make me sick. But the act of sitting at a table surrounded by people who share my blood, people I gave everything to, people who look right through me as though I'm made of glass, that part has been going on for 47 years, and I had learned over those decades to make myself small enough that they would forget I was there. I was very good at being forgotten. My name is Evelyn Whitmore. I am 71 years old. I have outlived a husband, a business partner, 3 economic recessions, and what I once believed was the worst heartbreak a woman could survive. I built a company from the ground up in an era when women were not supposed to build anything except dinners and excuses. I did it anyway. I did it quietly, without fanfare. And when the time came, I handed the reins of that company to my son because I genuinely, stupidly believed, that love was a kind of investment that paid returns. I was wrong about that. It took me longer than it should have to admit it, and I still carry the shame of that delay like a stone behind my sternum. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the night it all began to break open. It was Noah's 8th birthday. Noah is my grandson, Marcus's boy, and he is the one pure thing in a family that has otherwise gone rotten at the roots. He has his father's dark eyes, but none of his father's coldness. He laughs too loud and asks too many questions, and he still reaches for my hand sometimes in a way that makes me feel like perhaps I did not fail entirely. I love that child in a way I have no words for. The love I feel for Noah is not something I earned or built. It simply arrived, the moment they placed him in my arms, and it has not moved since. I had spent 3 weeks picking out his gift. 3 weeks. I know how that sounds. I know what you are thinking. She is a wealthy woman. What took so long? But the truth is that I did not want to give him something that could be broken or lost or discarded when the next shiny thing came along. I wanted to give him something that would grow, something that would still be standing after everything else had crumbled. So I went to the bank, and I sat with a young woman named Patricia who had to walk me through the paperwork twice because my hands would not stop shaking, and I purchased a savings bond in Noah's name worth $50, structured to mature over time into something far more significant. It was not about the money. I need you to understand that before we go any further. It was never about the money. I wrapped it in a small blue envelope with a card that I spent 2 days writing and then crossing out and writing again, trying to find the exact words that would make an 8-year-old understand that patience is a form of power, that waiting for something, really believing in the waiting, is one of the hardest and most important things a person can learn. I settled on, the best things grow slowly, Noah. This is yours to watch. Well, the party was held in the great room of the house that I had purchased in 1987, the house that I had paid off in 1994, the house that I had signed over to Marcus during what my attorney Gerald still refers to as the arrangement. It is a beautiful house, high ceilings, west-facing windows that bleed orange at sunset, a kitchen large enough to hold a family's entire history, if you let it. Marcus and Celeste had hired a decorator and a caterer, and someone whose entire job, as far as I could tell, was to hold a clipboard and look concerned. There were balloons in colors I could not name. There was a cake that cost more than my first car. There were children from Noah's school running through every room, shrieking with the particular joy that belongs only to people who have not yet learned to be afraid of anything. I sat in the chair nearest the window, not because anyone offered it to me, but because I had learned to locate the exits in any room before I settled into it. Celeste floated past me twice without making eye contact. She was wearing something cream-colored and structured, her hair pulled back in the kind of effortless arrangement that I know, from experience, takes an hour and a half to achieve. She is not a bad-looking woman. She is the kind of woman who has learned to weaponize her appearance, to use it as both a shield and a bludgeon, and she wields it with precision. "Evelyn," she said the second time she passed, pausing long enough to place a hand briefly on my shoulder. "So glad you could make it." As though I lived in another house, as though I had traveled some distance to be here, as though I had not been in the basement of this building for the past 11 months, existing in the 400 square feet they had given me after deciding the guest suite was better suited for Celeste's yoga equipment. "Of course," I said, because what else was there to say? I watched Noah tear through presents with the focused intensity that only children bring to gift opening, absolutely present, absolutely committed, not performing gratitude but genuinely feeling it, one thing at a time. He got a drone from Marcus. He got a gaming console from Celeste's parents. He got clothes and books and things that beeped and things that lit up, and he was gracious about all of it in the unpolished, genuine way of a child who has not yet learned to calculate. When he reached my envelope, he slowed down. I do not know why he slowed down. Maybe something in his face, the way he looked at me first before he opened it, told him this one was different. He pulled the card out carefully. He read it. His lips moved a little, the way they do when he is concentrating. Then he looked up at me, and there was something in his expression that I will carry to my grave, a kind of recognition, a kind of, "Oh, thank you, Grandma Evie," he said. And he said it quietly, the way you say something you actually mean. That was when Marcus arrived. He had been across the room, drink in hand, deep in conversation with a man I did not recognize. Some business associate, someone with the particular posture of a person who wants something from someone who has it. Marcus had that effect on people. He was tall, my son. He got his height from his father and his jaw from me, and his hunger from somewhere I have never been able to identify. He wore success the way some men wear cologne. Too much of it, so you smelled him before you saw him. He crossed the room with his easy, practiced stride and plucked the envelope from Noah's hands with the casual authority of a man who believes everything within his reach belongs to him. "What have we got here?" he said, pulling out the bond certificate. I watched his face. I have spent 71 years learning to read faces, and Marcus's was never difficult. He had his father's tells, that slight tightening around the jaw when something displeased him. I saw it happen in real time, that tightening, as he looked at the number. $50, he said. Not to Noah, to the room. The conversation nearby stilled. I'm not sure whether Marcus engineered that or whether it simply happened the way bad things sometimes simply happen. But suddenly there was an audience, and Marcus had never in his life been able to resist an audience. "Mom," he turned to me, holding up the bond the way a prosecutor holds up evidence. "Did you give my son a $50 savings bond?" "I did," I said, "for his birthday." "Yes." He laughed. It was not a warm laugh. It was the laugh of a man performing incredulity for a crowd, the kind of laugh that is meant to make the other person feel small. "Mom, I spend more than $50 on Noah's lunch every week. What is this supposed to be? Some kind of joke?" "It's not a joke," I said. My voice was steady. I had had a great deal of practice keeping my voice steady. "It's an investment. It will grow over time. I thought An investment." He repeated the word like it tasted bad. "You thought a $50 piece of paper was an appropriate gift for my son's birthday, while you're living in my house, using my utilities, eating my food." There it was. My house. My utilities. My food. I had known this sentence was coming. I had known it for 11 months, the way you know a storm is coming by the way the air changes. But knowing something is coming does not make it easier to absorb when it finally arrives. Celeste appeared at Marcus's elbow. She had a way of materializing at these moments that I had always found slightly uncanny, as though she kept a schedule of when her presence would be most useful to him. "Marcus," she said softly, in the voice she used to seem reasonable while being anything but, "Don't embarrass her." It was perfectly calibrated. "Don't embarrass her." Which landed as, Isn't it a shame she's already so embarrassing? A performance of mercy that was really a second blow delivered with a smile. I looked at Noah. He was watching his father with an expression I recognized and hated. That careful, closed-off look a child develops when they are trying to make themselves invisible so the people around them can do whatever they are going to do. He had pulled his knees up slightly, shoulders rounded, card still clutched in his hand. 8 years old, and already learning to disappear. I apologize if the gift was insufficient, I said. I heard my own voice as though from a distance, very calm, very even, the voice of a woman who has been absorbing insults long enough to develop a kind of professional composure around them. Happy birthday, Noah. I put my napkin on the table and I stood up. I did not cry until I was in the stairwell. 1 flight down, 2, the party sounds fading above me, and I stood on the landing between the first floor and the basement with my hand on the railing, and I let myself cry for exactly 4 minutes. Not because I am a woman who measures her grief in minutes, but because I knew from experience that if I gave it more time than that, I would not be able to stop. 4 minutes is what I allow. Then I put it somewhere internal, and I keep moving. The basement room was cold. It was always cold. Marcus had never quite gotten around to fixing the heating vent that fed this section of the house, and I had stopped asking about it somewhere around month 3 because I had realized that asking Marcus for anything only gave him another opportunity to remind me of what he believed I owed him. I had made the room mine as much as a room like that can be made yours. A lamp I'd brought from storage, a quilt my mother made in 1969, photographs on a shelf. People who were gone now, people who had loved me when loving me cost them something. And beneath the photographs, inside the bottom drawer of the dresser I had brought from the guest suite before Celeste's yoga equipment moved in, was a file. A gray accordion file held closed with an elastic band. Ordinary looking. The kind of thing you would pass over without a second glance. I sat on the edge of the bed and I held it for a long moment without opening it. I had not opened it in over 3 years. I had moved it twice. Once when Marcus had the basement renovated, once when the cleaning service came through, and each time I had held it the same way with the same weight, knowing what was inside without needing to look. It was everything, in a way that Marcus did not understand and could not have imagined. Gerald had drafted it in 2009, on my explicit instruction, after a conversation that began with me telling him I had a feeling about where things were headed and ended with him looking at me across his desk with the expression attorneys get when they realize their client is several steps ahead of them. Gerald is not a man who impresses easily. He impressed that day. The document inside was a trust agreement, not unusual for someone of my net worth. But the specific clause buried in Section 7, Paragraph 4, subsection C, was something we had spent 6 weeks perfecting. It was, Gerald had said at the time, the most elegant piece of protective language he had ever helped write. It allowed for the revocation of all transferred assets, the company, the properties, the accounts, under a precisely defined set of conditions. Conditions that had to do not with legal violations, but with something much harder to legislate and much more important. Character. Conduct. The basic human decency I had once believed I did not need to protect myself against because it had never occurred to me that my own son would make it necessary. I opened the file, I found the clause, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt something other than pain. I called Gerald at 11:17 that night. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been expecting the call for longer than either of us had acknowledged. Gerald is 74 and has known me for 29 years, and there is between us the particular understanding of people who have been through something real together. "Evelyn," he said. "Gerald," I said. "I think it's time." A pause. The sound of him setting something down. A glass. A book. What happened? I told him about the party, about the bond, about the way Marcus held it up for the room, about Celeste's perfectly timed performance of sympathy, about Noah's face, his careful, practiced disappearing. When I finished, Gerald was quiet for a moment. "You're sure?" he said. Not a question exactly, more like the last door in a hallway. the one you check before you commit to a direction. I have been sure for a long time, I said. I was waiting to be wrong. I wasn't wrong. Then we move on section 7, he said. We move on section 7, I confirmed. I could hear him already pulling papers. That was Gerald. No sentiment in the mechanics, full sentiment in the understanding. He knew what this cost me. He had been watching it cost me for years. He did not pretend it was easy, and he did not pretend it wasn't necessary, and that balance was one of the reasons I had kept him in my life for 3 decades. By morning, I said. By morning, he agreed. I hung up the phone and sat in the cold room for a while longer, looking at my mother's quilt, looking at the photographs of people who were gone. I thought about Marcus the way he was when he was small, the way he used to come find me in the kitchen at night when he couldn't sleep, the way he would climb into the chair beside me and put his head on my arm without asking permission. I thought about the first time he called me Mom instead of Mama, and how I had cried about it in private because it meant something was shifting, something was hardening, some early softness was beginning to calcify into the man he would become. I had loved him so hard. I want you to know that. Whatever comes after this, whatever you hear about what I did and how I did it, I want you to understand that it came after years of loving him as hard as I knew how, and watching that love drain away into something it was never meant to fill. I placed the $50 bond and the card. The best things grow slowly, Noah. This is yours to watch, on the dresser beside the lamp. Then I turned off the light and sat in the dark and waited for morning. By the time the sun came up, Marcus Whitmore would discover something he had never genuinely considered in his entire adult life, that everything he had, every account, every deed, every signature on every contract, had always quietly, irrevocably belonged to me. I did not sleep that night, not a single hour. I sat in that cold basement room with Gerald's voice still in my ear and the accordion file open on my lap, and I went through every page the way you go through something you already know by heart but need to touch again anyway. Not for information, but for courage. The kind of courage that lives in paper and ink and the signatures of people who believed you when you said you were serious. Gerald had called me back at 12:40 with confirmation that the emergency filing had been initiated. He had a contact at the county recorder's office, a woman named Sandra who had worked there for 22 years and who Gerald trusted absolutely. By 6 in the morning, Sandra would have processed the revocation trigger on the primary property deed. By 7, the flag on the corporate accounts would be live. By 8, the trust's appointed administrator, a man named Philip Hart, whom I had selected specifically because he had never met Marcus and had no reason to like him, would begin the formal notification process. It would be, Gerald said, a quiet morning for everyone except Marcus. I made tea at 5. I sat at the small table I had pushed against the basement window, the one that looked out at the garden at ankle level, so that all I ever saw from it were roots and soil and the occasional bird. And I drank the tea and I watched the light change, and I thought about all the mornings I had sat in the kitchen of this house when it was still fully mine, when the counters were lower because I had specified the height, when the cabinet pulls were brushed nickel because I had chosen them from a catalog in 1989, when the smell of the place was the smell of my life, and not the smell of someone else's performance of success. I thought about Marcus at 23, calling me from a conference in Denver, his voice vibrating with excitement over a contract he had almost closed. I had stayed on the phone with him for 2 hours that night, walking him through the negotiation strategy, asking him questions until he found the answer himself. That was always how I had taught him, not by giving him the answer, but by asking the right questions until he could see it. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped being able to see anything that did not directly benefit him. I do not know exactly when it happened. That is the thing about slow erosion. You never catch the precise moment the stone gives way. You only notice the absence of what used to be there. At 6:15, my phone buzzed. Gerald. Sandra confirmed. Deed revocation is recorded as of 6:08. Thank you, I said. Evelyn. A pause. You doing all right? No, I said. But I'm doing what's necessary, which is close enough. He let that sit for a moment. I'll call you when Philip confirms. I put the phone down and finished my tea. Cold by then. I drank it anyway. At 7:42 in the morning, I heard Marcus's alarm go off through the ceiling. I had memorized the sounds of this house the way you memorize the sounds of any place you have lived in long enough. The particular creak of the third stair, the way the hot water pipes knocked when someone turned on the master bath, the dull thud of Marcus's feet hitting the floor. Heavy sleeper. Always had been, even as a boy. He moved through mornings like a man pushing through resistance, grudging and slow until the coffee hit. I heard the shower. I heard Celeste's voice, high and indistinct, asking something. I heard Marcus answer in the flat, dismissive tone he reserved for early morning and anyone he considered below him, which, I had come to understand, was nearly everyone. At 7:58, the house went quiet in a way that was different from ordinary morning quiet. Then I heard him say, loud enough that it came through the floor above me clearly, his voice stripped of its usual controlled authority. "What the hell?" A pause. Celeste, come here." Louder this time. "My card. It declined. My card just declined at the coffee machine." I pressed my lips together. The coffee machine was one of those countertop subscription services that billed automatically. $42 a month. In the hierarchy of problems Marcus was about to discover, it was the smallest possible beginning. But it was the beginning. I heard Celeste come into the kitchen, heard the murmur of her voice, then his, then silence, then the sound of typing, probably his phone, trying another account. Then another silence, longer, the kind of silence that precedes something cracking open. His voice again, different this time, lower, harder. "Call the bank." Philip Hart called to me at 8:19. "Notification sent," he said. He had a precise, unhurried voice, a man who had delivered bad news enough times to have made peace with the mechanics of it. "Corporate authority transfer acknowledged by the board's legal counsel at 8:07. The company accounts are frozen pending the formal administrator review. Mr. Whitmore's personal accounts linked to the trust assets have been flagged. He will receive written notification by certified mail and email simultaneously as of 8:15. The vehicles? I asked. The 3 vehicles registered under the trust, the Bentley, the Range Rover, and the company car, will be flagged in the DM5 system by noon. He can drive them technically, but any attempt to sell or transfer will be blocked immediately. The office building? The deed revocation covers the primary commercial property on Hargrove Street. His property management company will receive notification from Sandra's office by end of business today. Philip paused. "Mrs. Whitmore, I want to be clear. I have handled trust revocations before, but the scope of this one is significant. Your son controlled a substantial portfolio. This is going to be a considerable disruption." "I know," I said. "Is there anything you need from my end in terms of personal security or—" "No," I said. "I need you to do exactly what the document says and nothing more. Gerald has my emergency contact instructions if anything changes." "Understood." Another pause, shorter this time. "For what it's worth, the clause you had drafted is ironclad. I've reviewed it 6 times since Gerald contacted me last night. There is no legal mechanism by which your son can reverse this without your explicit consent." "I know," I said again. I hung up and stood in the middle of my basement room and listened to the sounds above me escalate from confusion to urgency to something that, even through the floor, I could only describe as panic. "Okay." Marcus came downstairs at 8:34. I heard him on the stairs. Not the guest stairs that connected to the main hallway, but the back stairs, the ones that led directly to the basement corridor. He had never, in 11 months of my living here, come down those stairs. He had no reason to. The basement was where he had put things he did not want to look at. I was sitting on the edge of the bed with my hands folded in my lap when he opened the door. He did not knock. He looked terrible if I am being precise about it. His shirt was only half tucked and his hair was still damp from the shower, and there was a look in his eyes I had not seen in a very long time. Not since he was perhaps 11 years old and had broken something valuable and did not yet know whether I had discovered it. A look compounded of anger and fear in the particular ratio that only genuine powerlessness produces. "What did you do?" he said. Not a greeting, not mom, just that clipped, hard, the question of a man who already knows the answer and is furious about it. "Good morning, Marcus," I said. "Don't!" He stepped into the room. His jaw was working in that way it did. His father's tell in his father's son. "My accounts are frozen. My business accounts are frozen. I just got off the phone with the bank, and they said there's a trust administrator involved and that I need to contact someone named Philip Hart, and I don't know who the hell Philip Hart is, but I know this has something to do with you, so I'm asking you directly, what did you do?" I looked at him for a moment before I answered. I wanted to remember this, not cruelly, not with satisfaction exactly, but because I knew this was a pivot point, and I had learned in 71 years that pivot points deserve to be fully witnessed, that you should look at the moment things change and not turn away from it. I activated the emergency revocation clause in the original trust agreement, I said. Section 7, paragraph 4, subsection C. You were given a copy of the trust document in 2009 when we completed the asset transfer. Gerald will have the specific language if you need it reviewed. Marcus stared at me. Something moved across his face, the beginning of several different expressions, none of them fully landing. That clause was... He stopped, started again. That clause had conditions. There were specific conditions, and I never... You humiliated me in front of 40 people last night, I said. My voice was still even. I was proud of that, in a small, tired way. You took your son's birthday gift, a gift I chose carefully and with love, and you held it up like evidence of my inadequacy. You reminded me, in front of those same 40 people, that I live in your house and eat your food, as though I were a stray you had reluctantly agreed to shelter. I paused. The clause does not require a criminal act, Marcus. It requires a demonstrated violation of the values under which the assets were transferred. I built that provision specifically because I knew that the most corrosive betrayals are not always the illegal ones. The room was very quiet. From somewhere upstairs, I could hear Celeste's heels on the kitchen floor, the quick, nervous click of someone pacing. "You can't do this," Marcus said. "I already did. I'll contest it. I'll take it to court, and You'll spend a significant amount of money you no longer have access to, fighting a document that 29 years of legal review have confirmed is airtight." I said it gently. That surprised him, I think, the gentleness. He had been prepared for coldness, for anger. He had not been prepared for a woman who simply told him the truth without any particular heat behind it. Gerald drafted it to survive exactly this scenario. He anticipated that you might push back. He planned accordingly. Marcus put his hand on the door frame. He looked, and I say this without triumph, because there is no triumph in watching someone you once loved fall apart, only a terrible sadness. He looked like a man whose entire infrastructure had just been revealed to be built on borrowed ground, which, of course, it had. Mom. And there it was. Mom. The word he had not bothered with this morning until now, when it occurred to him that it might still work on me. Mom, listen to me. Last night, I was wrong, okay? I was wrong, and I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said those things, but you can't. This is my life. This is everything I've built. Everything I built, I said, quietly, without inflection. Marcus, everything you have because I built it and gave it to you because I trusted you to be the person I raised. That trust was conditional. The document said so. You had a copy. I never read past the first section. I know, I said. That stopped him. I know you never read it, I said, because if you had, you would have been more careful. Or perhaps not. Perhaps you simply never believed I would use it, and that is its own kind of answer about how you see me. He opened his mouth and closed it. Something in his face went through a collapse. Not quite tears, but the muscular precursor to them. Something pulling at the edges of his eyes and mouth. And for just a moment, a split second, I saw the 11-year-old boy who had broken something and was standing in the rubble waiting to be told what happened next. but I was not his mother in that way anymore. I had spent 11 months in the basement of the house I built, sitting at an ankle-level window watching roots grow. I was done being the soft place he crashed into. Gerald's contact information is in the file he sent you this morning, I said. He is prepared to walk you through the transition process. I paused. I would like you to leave my room now, please. He stared at me for a long moment, then he turned and walked out, and I listened to his footsteps go up the back stairs, and I sat with my hands still folded and breathed through the next few minutes one at a time. Bob. By 9:40, the sounds from upstairs had changed completely. Marcus was on the phone. I could hear the rhythm of it, even without the words, that controlled, urgent cadence of a man making calls he did not want to make. I heard him say, "Attorney," twice. I heard him say, "The board," once. I heard a long silence, then something that sounded like his fist coming down on the kitchen counter. Celeste. I did not hear it all, which, if I am honest, worried me slightly more than Marcus's noise. Celeste's silences were the ones you had to watch. At 10:15, I heard the front door open and close, once for Marcus, then once more, maybe 15 minutes later, for Celeste. The house went quiet, the particular quiet of a large house that has been evacuated in haste. I went upstairs. I had not been in the main part of the house in 6 weeks, not since Celeste had informed me at dinner that it would be more comfortable for everyone if I took my meals in my room. The kitchen looked as it always did, expensive, spotless, photographed for a magazine level, immaculate. A half-empty coffee cup on the counter, Marcus's. A chair pushed back crookedly from the island. I walked through the kitchen to the hallway to the main staircase, and I stood at the bottom and looked up at the house that had been mine for 32 years. The house where I had come home from the hospital with Marcus, where I had learned my husband was sick, and where I had nursed him, and where I had said goodbye. Where I had sat alone for the first several years after his death, and learned how to be a person in the new configuration my life had taken. Where I had made the company grow from a regional operation into something national, working from the study on the second floor with the window that faced the oak tree. I was not sentimental about reclaiming it. I want to be clear about that. Sentiment was a luxury I had spent 11 months slowly divesting. What I felt standing at the bottom of those stairs was something quieter and more durable than sentiment. It was recognition, a returning. The specific internal realignment of a woman who has been made small and is now, very deliberately, taking up the space she was always entitled to. I went into the study and sat at the desk I had ordered removed, and then discovered in storage when Marcus did the renovation. Someone, probably Gerald, bless him, had ensured the desk was never actually thrown away. It was here, in the corner, under a sheet. I pulled the sheet off and sat down and called my accountant, a precise, unflappable woman named Miriam, who had managed my finances for 16 years, and who received the news of the morning with the kind of focused efficiency I had always admired in her. I'll need a full audit of all trust-linked accounts going back 36 months, I told her. Already started, she said. Gerald called me at 6 this morning. I smiled at that. Gerald, preparing the ground before I even asked. 29 years. Anything I should know immediately? I asked. A pause. The kind of pause that has content in it. A few things, Miriam said carefully. There are expenditures in the last 18 months that I'd like to walk you through in person. Nothing that changes your legal position. The revocation stands regardless. But some of what Marcus was doing with the company accounts is going to require a more thorough review. I kept my voice steady. How thorough? Thorough enough that I've already sent a preliminary note to Gerald to determine whether we need to involve the Financial Crimes Division of the State Attorney's Office. I set the phone down for a moment on the desk and looked at the oak tree through the study window. It was bare-branched, November gray, but the structure of it was still there, the essential architecture of the thing, unchanged by the season. You could see, if you knew how to look, that it was not dead. Just waiting. I picked the phone back up. Schedule the meeting, I said. Gerald should be there. Gerald arrived at noon with a briefcase and the expression of a man who had been awake as long as I had and had made peace with it. We sat in the study, my study again, though I was still adjusting to the word, and he laid out the morning's developments in the organized, measured way that was his default mode. No drama, no editorializing, just sequence and implication. Marcus had attempted to reach 3 separate attorneys before 9 in the morning. All 3, Gerald knew through the tight circuit of people who knew things in the city, had told him the same thing. The document was valid, the revocation clause was enforceable, and any challenge would be expensive, slow, and unlikely to succeed. The board of Whitmore Holdings, the company I had founded and that Marcus had renamed without asking me, had received formal notification from Philip at 8:20. 2 of the 7 board members, Gerald told me, had called Philip directly to ask whether I would be resuming an active role. What did Philip tell them? I asked. That it was premature to discuss, Gerald said, which is accurate. And the Hargrove Street property? Formally recorded, the property management company received notice. There's a commercial tenant on the 4th floor who apparently called their own attorney immediately, which suggests they knew something wasn't right with the building's administration and were waiting for a change. Gerald allowed himself a small, controlled expression of something that wasn't quite amusement. Sometimes the situation reveals itself from the outside. Miriam arrived at 12:30, and we spent 2 hours going through what she had found. I'm not going to tell you every number. The numbers matter less than what the numbers said about the man my son had become. What I can tell you is that Marcus had, over the past 22 months, moved significant amounts of money from the company's operational accounts into accounts that were technically within the trust structure, but which he had been using, as far as Miriam could determine, for expenditures that had nothing to do with business operations. Celeste's redesign of the house interior, charged to a company account under a fabricated vendor name. A vacation property in Colorado owned under an LLC. Marcus had created without board approval, purchased with trust-linked funds, and never disclosed. 3 payments, totaling an amount I will only describe as significant, to a private individual whose connection to Marcus or the company Miriam had not yet been able to establish. The Colorado property alone, Miriam said, her voice flat and factual in the way it always was when the facts were bad, could constitute misappropriation of trust assets. Depending on how the LLC structure is viewed, it might be more than that. I sat with that for a moment. You said Financial Crimes Division. It was a preliminary thought. I want to be careful before involving outside investigators. But yes. Miriam looked at me steadily. Evelyn, your son may have been doing things with the company's money that go beyond poor judgment. Gerald was quiet, in the way he was quiet when he was thinking through the branches of a decision tree and had not yet reached the end. Let's get through the full audit first, I said. Document everything. Don't contact outside investigators yet, but document everything. Marcus called at 3:45. I had been expecting the call. What I had not expected was the tone, not the angry, cracking voice of that morning, but something flatter, more controlled. A recalibration had happened somewhere between 9 and 3:45, and whatever had driven it had replaced the raw panic with something that felt, even through the phone, more deliberate. I'd like to meet, he said. Tonight. Somewhere neutral. You can come here, I said. This is my house. A pause. He had to work through the resistance of that, I could tell. Fine, he said. 7 o'clock. He arrived at 7 with Celeste, which I had also expected. Marcus almost never walked into difficult rooms without Celeste. She was his strategy and his shield, and in certain situations, his alibi, and he had learned to deploy her the way some men deploy lawyers. They sat across from me at the dining room table, the same table where, 24 hours earlier, he had held up a $50 bond in front of an audience. Celeste was in something dark and understated, her expression arranged into a careful combination of contrition and composure. She had dressed for an apology. That, more than anything, told me they had been coached. I owe you an apology, Marcus said. He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed, with just enough inflection to suggest sincerity, but not quite enough spontaneity to generate it. Last night was wrong. I was stressed, and I took it out on you, and I shouldn't have. I waited. The things I said about the house, the food, that was cruel, and I knew it when I said it, and I'm sorry. I waited a little longer. Mom. His jaw worked. Celeste touched his arm briefly. A cue, I thought, or a steadying. Can we talk about the trust? About finding a way through this that doesn't destroy everything? Everything was built by me, I said. If it's destroyed, it can be rebuilt by me. What you're asking me is whether I'm willing to return something you never should have had the way you had it. Celeste spoke for the first time. Evelyn? Her voice was warm, measured, precisely warm. We're not trying to... This isn't adversarial. We love you. We want to find a resolution that works for everyone. I looked at her. I had known Celeste for 14 years. I had never fully known what she thought of me. Only what she needed me to be. Manageable, grateful, small. I had tried for a long time to give her what she needed, because I believed that peace in a family required sacrifice from the people strong enough to make it. I had been wrong about that too. Peace purchased by one person's constant sacrifice is not peace. It is a postponed argument with compounding interest. Celeste, I said, I appreciate the framing, but I've spent 11 months in the basement of my own home, eating in my room, listening to my utility bills described as generosity. I am not interested in a resolution that works for everyone. I am interested in a resolution that is correct. I paused. Those two things are not the same. Celeste's composure held, but just barely. Something moved under the surface of her face, not quite anger, not quite fear, but the beginning of a calculation shifting. Marcus leaned forward. What do you want then? Just tell me what you want. I want very little, I said. I want the audit completed. I want the findings reviewed. I want the company administered properly. And I want my grandson. I said it simply, without dramatic weight. Just the fact of it, set on the table like an object. I want Noah. Something changed in Marcus's face at that. The rehearsed quality dropped away, and what replaced it was raw, less performed, more real. Whether it was genuine paternal feeling, or whether it was the calculation of a man who recognized which lever had just been named, I could not say with certainty. Perhaps both. People are rarely purely one thing, even the ones who hurt you. Noah is my son, he said. His voice had dropped. Whatever is happening between us, you don't get to use Noah as a... I'm not using him as anything, I said. I am telling you that he is what matters to me. The money, the house, the company, those are mechanisms. Noah is what I'm protecting. I looked at him for a moment, which is more than I can say for what you're doing. Celeste stood up first. A decision made, I thought. A retreat to regroup. She put her hand on Marcus's shoulder and he stood too, and they walked to the door together, and at the threshold Marcus turned back once. He looked at me for a long moment. Something passed through his face that I could not name and did not try to. Then he left. I sat alone at the dining room table in the house that was mine again, and I listened to the car pull out of the driveway, and I thought about Noah, about his face at the birthday table, his careful, practiced disappearing, the way he had read my card with his lips moving and then looked up at me with that expression I would carry to my grave. The best things grow slowly. I had not yet understood the night before how much was about to be asked of me. I had thought the hardest part was done. The filing, the activation, the morning of dismantling. I had thought that what came after would be the quieter work of rebuilding. I did not know yet what Marcus was capable of when his back was truly against the wall. I did not know yet that the worst of it was still coming. But sitting alone in the house I had reclaimed, with the oak tree visible through the study window and Gerald's card on the desk and Miriam's audit underway, I knew one thing with the clean, unshakable certainty of someone who has finally stopped waiting to be wrong. I had done what was necessary. Whatever came next, I had done what was necessary. And I was not going back to the basement. The week after Marcus and Celeste left that dining room, I slept in the master bedroom for the first time in 11 months. I want to be honest about that. It was not triumphant. It was not the clean, cathartic reclamation that you might imagine. I stood in the doorway of that room for a long time before I could make myself cross the threshold, because the room had been redone in Celeste's taste. Gray walls, white linen, the cold minimalist aesthetic of a person who mistakes absence for elegance. And it did not look like a room I had ever belonged in. I had to remind myself, standing there, that the bones of the room were still mine. The window placement, the closet I had designed to run the full length of the east wall, the way the morning light came in at an angle that turned everything briefly gold before settling into ordinary daylight. I slept badly. I always sleep badly when something is unresolved, and everything was unresolved. Gerald had advised me in the days following the confrontation to limit contact with Marcus until the audit was complete. Not because I was in any legal jeopardy, the revocation was airtight, Philip had confirmed that 3 times, but because Marcus in a defensive position was, as Gerald put it, an unpredictable variable, and unpredictable variables needed time to declare their direction before you responded to them. I understood the logic. I followed the advice. I did not reach out to Marcus, and Marcus did not reach out to me. And the silence between us had the dense, pressurized quality of a storm system that had not yet decided where to make landfall. Miriam's audit continued. She called me every other day with updates. Careful, measured updates delivered in her flat accountant's voice, each one adding another layer to a picture that was becoming, with every passing day, harder to look at directly. The Colorado LLC was real, documented, and funded with a total of $412,000 drawn from a company account under a line item labeled Strategic Development Consulting. There was no consulting company. There was no consultant. There was a ski property that Celeste had apparently been using since the previous January and that Marcus had shown to no one, disclosed to no board member, and mentioned to no one in my vicinity. The 3 payments to the private individual, a name I will not use here, because at this point in the story the details of his involvement matter less than what they told me about Marcus's state of mind, turned out, upon Miriam's investigation, to be payments to a private investigator. A man Marcus had hired, Miriam believed based on the payment timeline, sometime around month 4 of my living in the basement. He had been paid to surveil me, to document my activities, my contacts, my communications, my visitors, to build, apparently, a file. I sat with that information for a full day before I could discuss it without my voice doing something I did not want it to do. The thing that undid me was not the surveillance itself. I had suspected on some level that Marcus monitored more than he let on. The thing that undid me was the timeline. Month 4. He had started building a file on his own mother 4 months into her living in the basement of her own house. 4 months in, while I was still making tea at the ankle-level window and allowing myself 4 minutes to cry on the landing between floors, Marcus had already been constructing the architecture of something. I did not know yet what he intended to build with it. I found out 11 days after the dining room confrontation, in a way I had not anticipated, and that hit me in the one place I had not fully fortified. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning. I was in the study reviewing a property management report that Philip's office had sent over, the kind of routine administrative work I had genuinely missed, the specific, grounding satisfaction of understanding exactly what you own and what state it's in. My phone buzzed with a notification from an email address I did not recognize. The subject line was blank. I opened it. There was no text in the email, only a video file, attached. I do not know why I opened it. Perhaps because something in the blankness of the subject line communicated a particular kind of intention, not spam, not marketing, but the deliberate nothing of a person who wants the content to land without warning. I opened it and watched it, and then I sat very still for a period of time I could not have accurately measured. It was Noah. He was sitting in what looked like his bedroom. I recognized the blue curtains, the shelf of books above the desk that I had helped him organize by color the previous spring. He was wearing his school sweatshirt, the gray one with the yellow logo he always pushed the sleeves up on. His hair was unbrushed, his hands were in his lap, and he was looking at something slightly off camera, slightly to the left, in the way children look when they are trying to remember something they were told to say. "Grandma Evie," he said. His voice was wrong, not wrong in the way of illness, but wrong in the way of a child reciting. Careful, measured, each word placed with the specific deliberateness of someone who has been given the words by someone else. "I really miss you. I want you to come home. Dad says you're angry at us, and I don't want you to be angry. Can you please come back? I miss having you here." He looked off camera again. Something happened in his face. A small, rapid negotiation. And then he looked back and said, "Please come home, Grandma." The video ended. I watched it again, then again. I watched it 4 times, each time focusing on something different. The eyes first, because eyes are hard to perform, especially a child's. Then the hands still in his lap, a stillness that was not natural to him. Noah was a kinetic child, always in motion, hands always involved in whatever he was feeling. Still, hands on Noah meant restraint. Restraint meant instruction. Then I watched the left edge of the frame, where his gaze kept drifting. There was no one visible there, but the angle of his eyes was consistent, returning to exactly the same point each time. Someone was standing just out of frame, holding something. Cue cards, or just their own face, expressionless and expectant, the silent pressure a child feels without being able to name it. I put the phone face down on the desk. I pressed both hands flat against the wood, and I breathed very carefully for about 30 seconds, the way Gerald had once told me his cardiologist had taught him to breathe during stressful situations. Slow in through the nose, controlled out through the mouth, repeat until the immediate crisis of feeling passes enough to allow for thought. Then I picked up the phone and called Gerald. "They used Noah," I said when he answered. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. A pause. "Tell me." I described the video. Gerald was silent through all of it. When I finished, he made a sound I had never heard from him before. Not quite a sigh, not quite a word. Something that had the texture of a man absorbing something he had hoped not to have to absorb. "Forward it to me immediately," he said. "Don't delete anything. Don't respond to the email. Don't attempt contact. I need to make some calls." "Gerald?" "Yes." "He's 8 years old." I said it the way you say a fact that is also an accusation. Not at Gerald, but at the situation, at the world that had produced a man who would look at an 8-year-old and see a tool. "He's 8 years old, and they put him in front of a camera and told him what to say." "I know," Gerald said, quietly. "With all the weight of 29 years of knowing me, knowing what that child meant to me, knowing what it cost to say it that simply. What are they trying to do? What does this get them?" "I have some ideas about that," Gerald said. "Forward me the video and give me 2 hours." Gerald called back in 90 minutes. "Competency petition," he said. He did not soften it. Gerald understood by now that I preferred the clean version. "My best assessment, based on the video content and the file Miriam uncovered on the private investigator, Marcus is building toward a competency petition, an attempt to have you declared mentally unfit." I had considered this possibility. I had turned it over in the first sleepless nights after the dining room meeting, examining it the way you examine a threat you cannot yet see clearly. But hearing it stated plainly was different from turning it over in the dark. It landed differently when a person said it out loud in the flat, specific language of legal procedure. "On what grounds?" I said. "The PI's file, which Miriam located references to in the company account payments, apparently includes a documented record of what Marcus has been characterizing as erratic behavior on your part. I don't have the contents, but based on the payment timeline and the amounts, he's been building this for months. The video from Noah is presumably meant to function as emotional corroboration. The concerned grandchild, the fractured family, the grandmother who has alienated herself from everyone who loves her." Gerald paused. "It's not a strong case legally. The revocation clause activity alone demonstrates clear, organized intent and decision-making. But a competency petition, even a losing one, can delay the trust administration, freeze Philip's authority temporarily pending review, and give Marcus time to move assets that we haven't yet located." I thought about the Colorado property, the 3 payments, the vendor line items in the company, accounts that Miriam was still untangling. If there were things Marcus had moved that we had not yet found, a competency proceeding, even a temporary one, even one that failed, could buy him weeks. Weeks in which things could be shifted, obscured, restructured. "He's not trying to win the petition," I said, following it through. "He's trying to buy time." "That's my read," Gerald said. "Yes." "And the doctor?" Because there had to be a doctor. A competency petition required medical evaluation, required someone willing to put their name on a clinical assessment that served Marcus's purpose. A short pause. I don't have a name yet, but if Marcus has been planning this for months, he would have sourced someone by now. I sat with that. A doctor, a paid evaluation, a proceeding that would require me to sit in front of someone who had already been told what conclusion to reach and perform wellness for a witness who had no intention of seeing it clearly. The specific, stomach-turning indignity of that, of having to prove your own sanity to a man your son had purchased. And underneath all of it, Noah. Noah in the blue-curtained room with his still hands and his careful borrowed words and his eyes drifting to the left, where someone stood just out of frame, holding him in place with nothing but expectation. Gerald, I said, I want to set a trap. Another pause. Longer this time. Define that. I want Marcus to believe it's working. I want him to think I'm rattled, that the video landed the way he intended, that I'm destabilized enough to make mistakes. I want him to proceed with whatever he's planning. I paused, while we get ahead of it. Gerald was quiet for a moment that had the quality of consideration rather than reluctance. He was not, I knew, a man who objected to strategy on principle. He objected to it when it was sloppy, when it left exposure. You'd need to be careful, he said finally. Very careful. If Marcus's attorney can demonstrate that you were performing distress rather than experiencing it, I'm not going to perform distress, I said. I am genuinely distressed. He used my grandson. I am not going to pretend that doesn't affect me. I am only going to allow it to appear that it affects me more than it does. A beat. Then, with a quietness that carried something like approval. All right, tell me what you're thinking. What I was thinking required 3 separate phone calls over the next 2 days and the cooperation of a woman I had not spoken to in over a year. Her name was Dr. Patricia Osei, Patty, to anyone who had known her before she had 3 letters after her name. She was 63, a forensic psychiatrist with a faculty appointment at the State University and a list of expert witness credentials long enough to wallpaper a hallway. She and I had served together on the board of a women's professional development organization in the early 2000s, and we had remained over the years in the loose but genuine contact of women who respect each other. More than circumstance has allowed them to be close. I had not called her because I needed her professionally. I called her because I needed someone who could tell me, honestly and without agenda, what a competency evaluation actually looked like from the inside, how it was constructed, what it tested, where its vulnerabilities were. And then, if what she told me confirmed what I suspected, I was going to ask her to do something that required a level of professional trust that I had no right to assume she still held for me. She called back the same evening. Evelyn Whitmore, she said, in the warm, slightly amused tone she had always used with me. I heard something interesting happened with your family. News travels, I said. In certain circles, yes. A pause. You wouldn't be calling me about the competency angle unless you already knew about it. Gerald confirmed it this morning. Right. She shifted. I heard her settle into what I thought of as her working posture, the slight change in voice that meant she was moving from social to professional in the way some people change rooms. Okay, talk to me. I told her about the PI, the video, Gerald's analysis, the Dr. Marcus would have in place. Patty was quiet for a long moment when I finished. You said you want to set a trap. I want to be prepared for a proceeding that Marcus believes he controls, and I want the preparation to be invisible until the moment it isn't. That means you need a counter-evaluator, she said. Someone who can conduct an independent assessment that is completed and documented before whatever Marcus's doctor is going to produce, so that when his evaluation is presented, yours already exists in the record. Yes, and you're asking if I'll do it. I'm asking if you're willing, I said. I know what I'm asking. Another pause. Shorter. When? As soon as possible. Gerald thinks Marcus's timeline is inside 2 weeks. I can do it Thursday, she said. My office. 4 hours, which is the minimum for a credible comprehensive evaluation. You'll need to sign the standard release so it's documentable. And Evelyn... She paused again, and when she spoke again, there was something unambiguous in her voice, something that had the texture of a woman who has watched other women be steamrolled in exactly this way and had opinions about it. You should know that if this goes to court, I will testify about what I find, not what you need me to find, what I actually find. I won't shade it. I know that, I said. That's why I called you. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Thursday at 2. Don't be late. The evaluation itself was 4 hours and 12 minutes of the most sustained self-examination I have ever been asked to perform. Patty did not go easy on me because she knew me. If anything, she was harder, more probing, more willing to sit in uncomfortable silences, more precise in her follow-up questions. She asked me about my husband's death and my grief and the years alone afterward. She asked me about the company and the transfer and the decisions that had led to the trust arrangement. She asked me about Marcus, not about the current situation, but about his childhood, our relationship, the things I regretted and the things I stood behind. She asked me about the basement. She asked me about those 11 months with a specificity that required me to reconstruct them in detail, which was not easy, and which I did anyway. At the end, she closed her notebook and looked at me across the desk with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of a person who has reached a conclusion they are comfortable with. "You know what I'm going to say?" she said. "I'd rather you say it anyway. You are one of the most cognitively intact and emotionally coherent individuals I have evaluated in a professional context in 22 years, she said. Whatever your son's doctor is going to find or claim to find, it will not survive contact with this evaluation. I exhaled slowly. Thank you, Patty. Don't thank me. The truth is easy to document when it's the truth. She picked up her pen and wrote something at the bottom of her notes. The harder thing is going to be what happens to you in that room with his doctor, because even when you know it's theater, it still costs you something to sit in front of someone who has been paid to misread you. I know, I said. Are you ready for that? I thought about the video. Noah's still hands, his eyes drifting left, the careful borrowed words that did not sound like him because they were not his. I'm ready for whatever gets my grandson out of that house, I said. The call from Marcus came 9 days after the dining room confrontation, not from his personal cell, from a number I did not recognize, which turned out to be a woman named Sandra Flint, who identified herself as an attorney representing Marcus Whitmore in what she called a family wellness matter. The phrasing was deliberate. Family wellness matter. Not a lawsuit, not a petition. Something softer, something that framed the proceedings as concern rather than aggression, as though a son's love for his mother had compelled him to take legal action for her protection. I had been expecting the call. Gerald had been in contact with another attorney in the same firm. A different matter, unrelated, but the kind of professional familiarity that meant he had been given a heads up about the filing 2 hours before Sandra Flint called me. Mrs. Whitmore, Sandra Flint said, in a voice trained for these conversations. Warm, measured, careful as a tightrope. I want you to understand that this process is intended to be as comfortable as possible for you. My client has arranged for a medical evaluation with Dr. I'm going to stop you there, I said. Please send all future communication to my attorney, Gerald Marsh. You have his contact information. I won't be discussing this directly. A brief pause. Of course, I just wanted to... Everything to Gerald, I said. Thank you. I hung up and called Gerald before Sandra Flint had time to dial him herself. She called, I said. I know, I got a courtesy call from one of the partners 20 minutes ago. A pause. The evaluation is scheduled for next Friday. Dr. Raymond Bale. He practices out of a clinic on the east side of the city. Patty knows him. What does Patty think? She said, and I am quoting directly, Raymond Bale will find whatever a paying client needs him to find and write it up in language too technical for a layperson to challenge. Gerald paused. So he's exactly what we expected. All right, I said. We let it proceed. We show up. We cooperate. Evelyn, are you certain you want to do this the way we discussed? Because the alternative is filing a preemptive challenge, citing the private investigator, the manipulated video, the... No, I said, not yet. I want them in the room with what they believe is a winning hand before we show ours. I paused. And I want the video documented. All of it. The email metadata, the timestamp, Noah's. My voice did something briefly, a small fracture I could not prevent. I moved past it. All of it. Everything about how that video was made and what it was made for. Already done, Gerald said gently. I filed it with Philip's office yesterday as supporting evidence in the trust administration record. It's part of the formal file. I let out a breath. Good. There's one more thing, Gerald said. His voice shifted slightly. Not alarm, but the particular register of someone delivering information they wish they did not have. Patty called me this morning, separately from her evaluation notes. She said she made some inquiries after our Thursday meeting, about Noah specifically, about what a child welfare referral would require in terms of documented evidence. I went very still. She believes, Gerald said carefully, that what's visible in the video, the coaching, the off-camera presence, the child's evident distress, combined with Miriam's documentation of Marcus's financial behavior, would meet the threshold for a mandatory welfare check on Noah. Not a custody proceeding at this stage. A welfare check conducted by the county's Family Services Division. I set the phone down for a moment on the desk. The oak tree was in the window again, bare-branched, November patient, built on roots that went deeper than anything visible from the surface. My grandson, 8 years old, sitting in a blue-curtained room with his hands in his lap and his words borrowed from someone standing just out of frame. I picked the phone back up. File it, I said. Are you sure? Once it's filed, Gerald, my voice was very quiet, very steady. He used that child to get to me, and whatever else Marcus has done, the money, the accounts, the fraud, I could have absorbed all of it. I could have fought it through proper channels, taken the time it needed to take, protected myself the long, careful way. I paused. But he put an 8-year-old boy in front of a camera and stood off to the side and coached him on how to emotionally manipulate his grandmother. That is not something I am willing to process slowly. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll call Patty. We'll file jointly. Her professional documentation alongside the video evidence. That carries more weight than either alone. Do it today, I said. Dr. Raymond Bale's clinic was on the east side of the city, in a building that was aggressively neutral. Beige walls, framed landscapes, the specific sensory deprivation of a place designed to communicate calm, so insistently that it communicated the opposite. I arrived on Friday at the designated time with Gerald beside me and Patty's completed evaluation in a sealed envelope in Gerald's briefcase, and I signed in at the front desk and sat in the waiting area and kept my hands loose in my lap the way Patty had advised. Gerald had told me, that morning over coffee, that Marcus and Celeste were expected to arrive separately, not at the same time as me, but after the evaluation, to meet with Bale and receive his initial findings. A standard arrangement in this kind of proceeding. The petitioner's representative typically attended a debrief. What Marcus did not know, could not have known, because Gerald had filed the motion the previous afternoon in a courthouse 3 blocks away, timed carefully, was that the Family Services welfare check had been initiated that morning. 2 caseworkers from the county's Division of Child and Family Services had arrived at Noah's school at 9:15. They had spoken with Noah in the presence of the school counselor, following protocol, without Marcus or Celeste's knowledge or consent. That was how welfare checks worked. They did not require parental notification in advance. That was the point. I did not know yet what Noah had told them. I would not know until Gerald received the preliminary report. What I knew, sitting in Raymond Bale's waiting room with the beige walls pressing in from all sides, was that the ground had shifted underneath Marcus's plan in ways he had not accounted for. Dr. Bale turned out to be a man of about 60, with the practiced bedside manner of someone who charged a great deal for it, and had learned to make the cost invisible. He was not unkind, exactly, more like a man who had developed a professional relationship with neutrality so complete that kindness and cruelty had become equivalent to him. He asked me questions for 3 hours. Some of them were reasonable. Some of them were structured in ways I recognized from Patty's preparation. Questions designed to catch a particular kind of disorganized response, a particular kind of confabulation. questions designed to find something that could, with the right framing, look like impairment. I answered everything clearly, calmly, and with the specific precision of a woman who had been in business for 40 years and knew exactly how language could be used and misused. At the end of the evaluation, Bale made a note and told me his report would be finalized within the week. He thanked me for my time with the particular courtesy of a man who believed I had no idea what the report would say. I thanked him in return. I was gathering my coat when Gerald's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and something happened in his face. A quick, controlled movement. A man absorbing good news and keeping the dimension of it professional. He slid the phone into his pocket and opened the door for me. We were in the parking lot between the clinic doors and the car when Marcus's black Range Rover pulled in. He was driving. Celeste in the passenger seat, both of them looking at me with the expression of people who believe they have just watched an opposing team walk off the field. We stood in the parking lot and looked at each other for a moment, the four of us, across the gray November asphalt. Then I saw it, the moment the calculation shifted on Marcus's face. Not anything I said, not anything Gerald did. Something else. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he looked at it, and the color left his face in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He had just found out about the welfare check. Celeste said something to him, low, urgent, her hand on his arm. He did not respond to her. He was looking at me, and in his eyes, for the first time in all of this, was something that was not calculation, not performance, not the constructed armor of a man who believed he was in control. What was in his eyes was the expression of someone who has just understood, fully and without any remaining ambiguity, that the woman he had put in the basement and mocked in front of 40 people and surveilled for 11 months and used her own grandson against was not, had never been, the manageable, diminished, forgivable because ignorant thing he had needed her to be. He had walked into Raymond Bale's clinic believing he held every card. He had not known about Patty's evaluation. He had not known about the welfare check. He had not known that Gerald had spent the previous 2 weeks building a parallel structure, quiet, invisible, patient as an oak tree in November, designed to stand firm when his structure came down. I did not say anything to him. There was nothing to say that the situation was not already saying more clearly than I could. I got into the car. Gerald drove. The clinic disappeared in the rearview mirror, and I watched it go and pressed my hands together in my lap and breathed, slow in, controlled out, and thought about an 8-year-old boy in a blue curtain room and the welfare caseworkers who had sat with him that morning, and the things he might have told them when the door was closed and there was no one standing just out of frame. I thought about patience. I thought about what grows slowly. I thought about roots that go deeper than anything the eye can find from the surface. And I thought, Marcus had made one mistake that superseded all the others. He had believed, because I had allowed it, that my silence meant I had nothing left to say. He had not understood. Not until that parking lot, not until his phone buzzed with news he had not arranged, that I had simply been waiting for the right moment to say all of it at once. The preliminary report from the county's Division of Child and Family Services arrived at Gerald's office the following Monday morning. I was there when he opened it. We had developed, over the course of this particular crisis, a habit of reviewing significant documents together in person, rather than over the phone. Not because Gerald needed me present to understand a document, but because we had both learned that certain pieces of information land differently when you receive them alone, and that landing them together was a form of protection neither of us had explicitly discussed, but both of us had arrived at independently. That was what 29 years looked like from the inside. Gerald read through the report first, in full, without speaking. Then he set it on the desk and slid it across to me. I read it twice. The caseworkers, a woman named Diana Reyes and a man named Thomas Park, had spent 40 minutes with Noah in the presence of his school counselor, following the protocol for a non-emergency welfare referral. The report documented their observations in the measured, careful language of people trained to be precise when precision carries weight. Noah had presented as cooperative and verbally responsive. He had not demonstrated signs of physical harm. He had, however, according to the report, displayed what the caseworkers described as age-inconsistent behavioral inhibition and apparent anxiety response to direct questioning about home environment. When Diana Reyes had asked Noah, in the gentle, open-ended way these interviews were structured, whether there was anything at home that made him feel worried or uncomfortable, Noah had said yes. When she asked him to tell her about it in his own words, he had said, "Dad gets really mad sometimes, and it's loud. And they made me do a video, and I didn't want to, but they said it was important, and I had to say the right things, or we'd do it again." I read that sentence 3 times. I read it until the words stopped being words and started being a sound. The sound of an 8-year-old boy sitting in a room with blue curtains, trying to navigate between what the adults in his life needed from him and whatever was left of what he himself felt. I set the report down on the desk and looked at the window for a moment. The oak tree. Always the oak tree, which had now become, without my choosing it, the specific thing I looked at when I needed something external to confirm that the world still had structure. "The caseworkers have opened a formal welfare case," Gerald said. "That means mandatory follow-up visits, documentation, and a determination within 60 days as to whether Noah's living situation meets the threshold for intervention." 60 days is too long, I said. "I know, which is why I've already called Judge Harmon's clerk." Gerald paused. "Harmon handled the Whitmore estate probate in 2006, when your husband passed. She knows the asset history. She has professional familiarity with the trust structure, which matters. I've requested an emergency hearing on the custody question, not a final determination, an emergency temporary order to have Noah placed with you while the welfare case and the criminal review proceed." "Criminal review," I said, because Miriam had used that phrase, and Gerald had used that phrase, and I had been carrying it for weeks without it having fully arrived in the way it was apparently about to arrive now. "Miriam filed her full audit findings with the state attorney's office on Friday," Gerald said. "Evelyn, the Colorado property alone is enough for a misappropriation charge. The vendor fabrication, the fake consulting company, adds a fraud count. And the payments to the PI, if the state's attorney can establish that those payments were made with the intent to produce a fraudulent competency petition, could add an obstruction component." He paused. "They are not going to arrest Marcus today. The state's attorney will review, investigate, and build the case the way they build cases. It will take the time it takes, but the referral has been made. The clock is running." I sat with all of that. The weight of it was not what I had expected. I had expected something that felt more like satisfaction, the rightness of consequences aligning with actions. What I actually felt was much heavier than satisfaction and much more complicated. It was the specific exhaustion of a person who has been proven right about something they desperately wish they had been wrong about. I had not wanted Marcus to be this. I need you to understand that. Whatever I had done with the trust, whatever mechanisms I had set in motion, none of it had come from wanting him to fall. It had come from needing to protect what he was willing to destroy. Those are different things, and the difference matters, even when the outcome looks the same from the outside. "The emergency hearing," I said. "When?" "Thursday," Gerald said. 2 days. Those 2 days were the longest I remember. I stayed in the house, my house, though I still caught myself occasionally treating rooms as though I needed permission to be in them, the residue of 11 months of compression not yet fully dissolved. I slept badly. I ate at odd hours. Gerald called twice a day with updates I mostly already knew, and I understood that the calls were not really about information. They were about the specific comfort of hearing a familiar voice confirm that things were still in motion, still proceeding, still anchored in reality rather than the particular unreality that descends when you are waiting for something enormous. Miriam called Tuesday afternoon with one additional finding from the audit that she had held back, she said, until she was certain of it. "The payments to the PI," she said. I traced the full payment history. There were 7 payments, not 3. The first 4 were made prior to the ones I initially found. They're in a personal account Marcus maintained separately from the trust-linked accounts, which is why they didn't surface in the first pass. 7 payments, I said, going back 18 months. Marcus started surveilling you before you moved into the basement. He started before the arrangement was final. Miriam paused. I think he suspected, from the beginning, that there was a revocation mechanism. He was building a file before you ever came to live in this house. I sat down. I had been standing at the kitchen counter, and I simply sat down on the floor next to the counter, which is something I had not done since I was perhaps 30 years old, and I sat there with my back against the cabinet and the phone in my hand, and I absorbed that particular piece of information. 18 months before I moved in. Before the birthday party, before the basement, before 11 months of ankle-level windows and 4-minute crying sessions on the stairs. Before all of it, he had been watching me, documenting me, constructing a case against his own mother, because some part of him had always known, that what he had been given could be taken back, and he had spent 18 months trying to prevent that rather than spending 18 months trying to be the person it would never need to be taken from. "Miriam," I said. My voice was very quiet. "Add it to the file." "Already done," she said. I sat on the kitchen floor for a while after that, not crying. Past the place where crying was available to me, past the place where emotion came as fluid rather than as a kind of internal stone. I sat with my back against the cabinet my husband had installed in the summer of 1991 because I had wanted more storage and he had taken 3 weekends to give it to me, and I thought about what it meant to give someone everything and have them spend 18 months preparing for the possibility that you might take it back. I thought about love, about what it actually is, stripped of the language we dress it in. I had loved Marcus with the specific, unreasonable love of a parent, a love that persists past evidence, past injury, past the accumulated weight of being repeatedly shown who someone has decided to become. I had loved him past the point where love was rational, and I had kept loving him past the point where love was safe, and it had cost me 11 months in a basement and an 8-year-old boy in a blue-curtained room with borrowed words in his mouth. At some point, love has to be answered by the person receiving it. That is not a condition. It is simply what love is when it is real. It moves in both directions, or it is something else, something that wears love's clothing but has a different name underneath. I got up off the kitchen floor. I made coffee. I went back to the study and I worked until midnight on the documents Gerald needed me to review for Thursday's hearing, and I went to bed and lay awake for most of it. And in the morning, I got up and did it again. Judge Eleanor Harmon's courtroom was smaller than I expected. I had appeared in courtrooms before. Contract disputes, a zoning matter in 1998, the estate proceedings after my husband died. But this felt categorically different in a way I had not anticipated. Those other proceedings had involved property and contracts and the administrative machinery of transferring assets from one legal category to another. This proceeding was about a child, about who would go home with a child when it was over. Marcus and Celeste were already seated when Gerald and I arrived. Marcus was in a suit I did not recognize, something new, something that said capable and reasonable in the specific vocabulary of courtroom appearance. His new attorney, Sandra Flint, sat beside him with a legal pad and the composed, slightly aggressive readiness of a woman who was very good at her job and knew it. Celeste was in gray. She had done something with her hair that made her look, if possible, even more strategically composed than usual, and she sat with her hands folded and her back straight, and her expression arranged into the perfect posture of a loving mother who could not understand why any of this was necessary. I noticed that Marcus did not look at me when I came in. He looked at the table, at Sandra Flint's legal pad, at the judge's bench. Anywhere that was not me. That told me something. Not about guilt, though guilt was certainly present, but about the specific kind of man Marcus had become. A man who could only function in the presence of people he believed he controlled. Uncertainty made him look away. Judge Harmon entered at 9:03, a compact woman in her early 60s with reading glasses on a chain and the deliberate, unhurried posture of someone who had been conducting these proceedings for long enough that the authority of the room had become simply the atmosphere she moved through rather than something she needed to perform. She reviewed the filing, asked preliminary questions, heard Gerald's opening statement on the emergency custody request, and then turned to Sandra Flint. What happened in the next hour and a half was the specific theater of a legal proceeding in which one side has arrived with a structure they believe is intact and the other side knows it is not. Sandra Flint presented Marcus's position competently and with evident preparation. The concerned son, the family wellness petition, the medical evaluation by Dr. Bale, the pattern of what she characterized as Evelyn Whitmore's increasing social withdrawal and erratic financial decision-making. She was good. I want to give her that. She took what she had and built it into something that, if you did not know the other side of it, had a shape that resembled concern. Judge Harmon listened. She asked questions, precise, specific questions of the kind that suggested she had read the full filing rather than a summary. When Sandra Flint finished, the judge made a note and looked at Gerald. Gerald stood up and placed Patty's evaluation on the record first. He did not make a speech about it. He simply submitted it with a brief characterization of Dr. Osei's credentials and let it sit beside Dr. Bale's report like a correction placed next to an error. Then he submitted the welfare report from Diana Reyes and Thomas Park. Then Miriam's audit findings, the full version, the one with all 7 PI payments, and the Colorado LLC and the fabricated vendor accounts. Then the video, the email metadata, the timestamp. Marcus's face during this portion of the proceeding was something I will not describe in detail because some expressions exist in a space too private for narration, even when the person wearing them has forfeited the right to privacy through their own actions. I will say only that he sat very still and that his hands on the table in front of him were flat and pressing down, as though the surface was the only thing keeping him in place. Celeste was harder to read. She had the composure of a woman who had prepared for multiple outcomes, and she maintained it throughout with a rigidity that, by the end, was its own kind of revelation. Not guilt, not fear exactly. The specific expression of someone who had made a series of calculated decisions and was now waiting to see which calculation had been wrong. When Gerald sat down, Judge Harmon looked at the table in front of her for a long moment. She removed her reading glasses and held them, turning them slightly in her hand. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, looking at me directly for the first time in the proceeding. "I've reviewed Dr. Osei's evaluation in full. I've reviewed the child welfare report. I've reviewed the audit documentation." A pause. "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd like a direct answer." "Of course," I said. "What do you want?" The question sat in the room for a moment. Sandra Flint shifted slightly in her chair. Gerald was still. "I want my grandson placed in a stable, safe environment while the associated proceedings are completed," I said. "I want him to understand that what happened to him was not his fault, and that the people who love him are capable of showing it without using him as a mechanism. And I want the truth of this situation, all of it, to be part of the record." Judge Harmon looked at me for a moment. Then she put her glasses back on. "I'm granting the emergency temporary order," she said. "Noah Whitmore is to be placed in the care of Evelyn Whitmore, effective immediately, pending the completion of the child welfare determination and the associated legal proceedings." She looked at Marcus and Celeste. "Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore, I want to be very clear about something. The documentation submitted this morning describes a pattern of behavior toward an elderly parent, toward a minor child, toward the institutional structures of a trust that was extended in good faith, that this court takes seriously. The family services case is open. The financial referral is under active review. I strongly advise you both to obtain independent legal counsel for those matters separate from the competency petition, which I am denying." She paused. "Do you understand what I've told you?" Marcus said yes. His voice was almost inaudible. "Good," Judge Harmon said, and moved to the next item on her docket with the efficiency of a woman who had many other things to do today. Gerald handled the logistics of getting Noah. I was not present when the child services worker accompanied him from school that afternoon. Gerald had advised me to let the process happen through its proper channels rather than appearing in person, which could be characterized as pressure. I understood the reasoning. I stayed in the house, and I made Noah's room, the small guest room on the second floor that had been used for storage since Celeste's renovation, into something that looked like it belonged to a child. I went to the store and I bought the things an 8-year-old needs: the right sheets, a lamp with a warmer light, a bookshelf. A box of cereal I knew he liked because he had told me once, in the casual, confiding way children have, that the one with the blue box was better than the one his mother bought. I was not calm during any of this. I want to be accurate about that. I moved through the store with a list, and I crossed things off, and I came home, and I put things in the room, and I was functional and organized and absolutely not calm. My hands shook a little, loading the bookshelf. I knocked a lamp off a counter in the kitchen and stood looking at it on the floor for a moment before I picked it up. I was afraid. Not of the outcome. The temporary order was clear. The logistics were in motion. I was afraid of the moment itself, of Noah walking through the door, of what that would look like for him. Not for me, for him. Whether it would feel like rescue or loss or some combination that an 8-year-old body does not have vocabulary for and has to carry a sensation instead. Gerald brought him at 5:15. I heard the car in the driveway. I heard the door. I was standing in the kitchen, not because I had decided to be in the kitchen, but because I had been moving through the house and happened to be there when the sound came, and I stayed where I was and waited. Noah came through the door first, ahead of Gerald, with his backpack on and his school sweatshirt, the gray one, the yellow logo, and his hair was unbrushed the same way it had been in the video, and he stopped when he saw me and stood in the doorway looking at me with an expression that was too complex for his face, too many things happening at once, and then he crossed the kitchen in about 4 steps and put his arms around my waist and pressed his face against my shoulder and did not say anything. I held him. I put my arms around him and I held on, and I did not say anything either because there was nothing to say that would be an improvement on the fact of it. Gerald stood in the doorway for a moment with his briefcase and his coat and the professional composure of a man who has spent 29 years not letting his feelings complicate his function, and then he quietly put the briefcase down and looked at the wall for a moment instead of at us. After a while, Noah said, muffled against my shoulder, "Are you mad at me?" "No," I said. "Not even a little. I didn't want to do the video." "I know. Dad said it would help." A pause. "I didn't think it would help." I tightened my arms a little. "You were right," I said. "It didn't help. But none of that was your job to fix. None of it was ever your job." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are we staying here?" "For now," I said. "Yes." He pulled back and looked up at me with those dark eyes, his father's eyes in every physical detail, and somehow not like his father's eyes at all. "Is there food?" I almost laughed. It came out as something between a laugh and the other thing, the thing I had been managing for weeks now, but it came out as mostly a laugh. "Yes," I said, "there's food. I bought the cereal with the blue box." His face changed completely. "The good one?" "The good one." He dropped his backpack on the kitchen floor. Just let it fall, the way children do, with the absolute confidence that someone will deal with it, and went to the cabinet I pointed to, and I stood in the kitchen of my house and watched my grandson eat cereal at 5:15 in the afternoon and breathed for what felt like the first time in weeks. Wow. The arrest came 18 days later. Gerald called me at 8 in the morning. "State's attorney moved this morning," he said. "Marcus was taken in at 6:45, Celeste an hour later." I sat down at the kitchen table. Noah was still asleep. He had been sleeping later since he came to stay, the particular deep sleep of a child whose nervous system is finally allowed to rest. I could hear the silence of the house above me, and I sat in it. "Charges?" I said. "Marcus. Misappropriation of trust assets, fraud, and a count of conspiracy relating to the competency petition. The state's attorney's office moved faster than I expected. I think the child welfare angle accelerated their timeline." Gerald paused. "Celeste. Conspiracy and 1 count of child endangerment relating to the production of the video." Child endangerment. I had not known that charge was coming, and when Gerald said it, the kitchen went very still around me. Not because I was surprised, but because the official naming of a thing makes it more real than you are ready for, even when you already know it. "They'll be arraigned this afternoon," Gerald said. "Bail is the prosecution's recommendation. The amounts are substantial enough that both of them will need to liquidate assets to post, assets that are, at this point, considerably constrained." "The Colorado property," I said. "Among other things, Philip's office has already filed a lien. The LLC is effectively frozen." A pause. "Sandra Flint withdrew from the case this morning. Both of them will need new counsel." I looked at the window. The oak tree was barely visible from the kitchen, a branch, the edge of the trunk, November had given way to December, and the branches were the same bare structure they had been for weeks, the same deep roots, the same patient waiting. "Gerald," I said, "how long does this take? The criminal case?" "A year, maybe more, depending on whether they negotiate a plea." He said it carefully, the way he said things when the answer was not the answer the person wanted, but was the true one. "It will not be resolved quickly. These things rarely are. A year, maybe more." Noah upstairs, sleeping. The house around me, settling into what it was again. Mine, lived in, not a performance of wealth, but an actual place where a life was being conducted. The study with the oak tree window and the desk from storage. The guest room with the blue box cereal in the cabinet and the lamp with the warm light. "Okay," I said. "There's one more thing," Gerald said. His voice shifted, not to something grave, but to something quieter, something that had a different texture than the rest. "The board of Whitmore Holdings has requested a formal meeting. They want to discuss the future administration of the company. Philip's office has been managing the accounts and holding, but the board needs direction going forward." He paused. "They asked specifically whether you would be willing to return in an active capacity." I sat with that. The company I had built from a regional operation into something national, working from the study upstairs. The thing I had given Marcus because I believed love was a kind of investment that paid returns. The thing he had renamed without asking and used as a vehicle for the person he had chosen to become. "Tell them I'll think about it," I said. "That's all they need for now," Gerald said. We hung up. I sat at the kitchen table in the December morning quiet, and I thought about the word think, about what it meant to take time with something, to refuse to rush a decision because the situation pressured you toward speed. I had built an entire company on the conviction that the best decisions were the ones you could defend in the morning, 3 years from now, not the ones that felt right in the heat of a moment. Some things were worth the patience. Some things took the time they took and were better for it. At 7:45, I heard Noah's feet on the stairs. That particular uneven thud of a child who is still half asleep and not yet fully coordinating. He appeared in the kitchen doorway in pajamas, hair destroyed by sleep, squinting against the light. "Is there more cereal?" he said. "There's more cereal," I said. He came to the table and climbed into the chair across from me and folded his arms on the table and put his chin on them, looking at me with the heavy-lidded, unguarded expression of a child who has not yet put his defenses on for the day. "Grandma Evie," he said. "Yeah." "Are you okay?" I looked at him. 8 years old, asking me if I was okay, not because he had been told to ask, not because someone off camera was holding up a sign, because it had occurred to him, on his own, in the unfiltered early morning, to wonder. "I'm working on it," I said, because that was the truth, and the truth was what he deserved. He considered that for a moment with the serious, unhurried consideration of a child who takes answers seriously. "Okay," he said, and then, "Can I have 2 bowls?" "You can have 2 bowls," I said. He got up and got the cereal, and I sat at the table in the December light and watched him, and the house held us both the way a house holds the people who have earned their place in it. Not perfectly, not without damage, not without the marks of what had happened here, but firmly, structurally. The way roots hold even in the season when nothing above the ground appears to be alive. 18 days since the parking lot. 18 days since the moment Marcus had understood, standing in a gray November parking lot with his phone buzzing in his hand, that I had not been the woman he thought he had managed into smallness. The criminal case would take a year. The welfare determination would take its 60 days. The audit would continue, and the board would wait for my answer, and Gerald would call twice a day, and Miriam would send reports, and the machinery of consequence would proceed at the unhurried pace of institutions that do not rush because they do not need to. And I would be here, in the house that was mine, with the child who had reached for my hand at the birthday table, who had read my card with his lips moving, who had looked up at me with the expression I would carry to my grave. Whatever came next, whatever the trial produced, whatever the board decided, whatever shape my life was going to take in the year ahead, I knew one thing with the specific certainty of a woman who has been tested and has not broken. I was not going back to the basement, and no one, Not Marcus, not Celeste, not a corrupt doctor, or a fabricated vendor account, or a video designed to hollow out my greatest vulnerability, had ever actually had the power to put me there permanently. They had only ever had the power I gave them, and I had taken it back. The trial date was set for the following October, 11 months away. Gerald told me this on a Tuesday morning in December, standing in my kitchen with his coat still on because he had learned over 29 years that some news was better delivered standing up, that sitting down with certain information gave it a permanence that standing kept provisional, kept something you could still walk away from when you were ready. He told me the date, and he told me what the prosecution had confirmed about their case, and he told me that both Marcus and Celeste had retained new counsel, separate attorneys this time, which told its own story about the state of their marriage under pressure. Then he put his briefcase down and accepted the coffee I had already poured, because some rituals persist regardless of the news they accompany. Noah was at school. The house was quiet in the particular way it had become quiet since he arrived, not the empty quiet of the 11 basement months, but the quiet of a place that had a person in it who would return, a lived-in quiet, a quiet with a backpack by the door and cereal bowls in the dish rack and a library book on the hallway table that had been there for 4 days and that I kept meaning to remind him about. 11 months, I said. At minimum, Gerald said, wrapping both hands around the mug. If they negotiate a plea, which Sandra Flint's successor has already signaled a willingness to explore, it could be resolved sooner. But the Financial Crimes Division wants the full fraud count in any agreement, and Marcus's new attorney is pushing back on that. He still thinks he can minimize it, I said. Marcus has never stopped believing he can minimize things, Gerald said. Not unkindly, just factually, the way Gerald said most things. I looked at the window. December had settled into the kind of cold that was serious about itself, and the oak tree had the stripped architectural clarity of a thing reduced to its essential structure. I had been looking at that tree for 32 years, and I had never, until these past few months, understood how much I had needed it, how much I had needed something that simply stood there, season after season, demonstrating that the absence of visible growth was not the same as the absence of life. I want to talk about the board meeting, I said. Gerald set his mug down. I thought you might. Did. I had told him I would think about it, and I had thought about it, for 3 weeks, in the margins of everything else. In the early mornings before Noah woke up, and in the late evenings after he was asleep, turning the question over with the specific patience I had learned to apply to decisions that could not be undone. The board of Whitmore Holdings had been waiting. Philip's office had been managing the accounts and holding with competent, careful neutrality. But a company in administrative holding was a company losing momentum, and I had built this particular company on momentum, on the conviction that standing still was its own kind of moving backward. The question was not whether the company needed direction. The question was who I was now, and whether the person I had become through all of this was the same person who had run that company, or whether something had shifted, some fundamental reorientation had occurred in the months of basements and birthday tables and parking lots and welfare reports. That made the old version of me and the old version of my ambitions no longer a clean fit. I had been thinking about that question for 3 weeks. I had arrived at an answer that was not tidy, but was true. Tell them I'll take the meeting, I said, but not as CEO. I want to discuss a transition structure, someone younger in the operational role, with a board that has real oversight authority. I'll take a chair position, strategic, not executive. Gerald looked at me for a moment. That's a significant reduction in direct control. I know, I said. I spent 40 years building direct control into a structure that I then handed to someone who used it as a personal account. I'm not interested in rebuilding that same architecture. I paused. I want the company to outlast me. That requires it to not be dependent on me. Gerald nodded slowly. The board will ask about Marcus's ownership stake, the shares that were part of the original transfer. Those revert under the trust revocation, I said. Phillips already confirmed it. They'll also ask about Noah. A pause. Not inappropriately. They'll want to know whether there's a succession consideration given the trust restructure. I thought about Noah eating cereal at 5:15 in the afternoon, about the library book on the hallway table, about the question he had asked me on his first morning, "Are you okay?" in the unfiltered sincerity of a child who had not yet learned to use concern as currency. Noah is 8 years old, I said. He is not a succession plan. He is a child who deserves the freedom to become whatever he actually is, without being pointed at something before he's had the chance to find out what he wants. I paused. Tell the board I said that. Gerald almost smiled. Word for word? Close enough, I said. Stimek. The board meeting was in January, on a Thursday morning so cold the windows of the conference room had a faint condensation at the edges. I had not been in this room. The main conference room at Whitmore Holdings' 16th floor, the view of the city still exactly as I had specified it when we built out the space in 2004. Since the day I had signed the original transfer documents and handed Marcus the pen and watched him take it with the particular contained excitement of a man who had been waiting for a thing so long he could no longer fully feel it arriving. The 7 board members were already seated. I knew 4 of them, had known them for years through the normal traffic of business and civic overlap that accumulates over a long career. The other 3 were people Marcus had added during his tenure, and they watched me enter with the careful neutrality of people who were not yet sure which way the wind was fully blowing. I sat at the head of the table, not because I had planned to, exactly. The seat was simply there, and I sat in it, and no one moved to suggest otherwise, and that small, unremarkable fact told me more about the current state of the room than anything that had been said so far. I talked for 40 minutes. I told them what I was proposing, the transition structure, the chair position, the operational search for a new CEO. I told them what I was not proposing, which was a return to the pre-transfer arrangement, because that arrangement had failed in a way that required acknowledging rather than papering over. I told them what the trust restructure meant for the company's ownership framework going forward, in language precise enough that there were no comfortable ambiguities left to hide in. Then I asked if there were questions. There were questions. Some of them were good questions, the kind that came from people who cared about the company's direction and not merely their own position within it. Some of them were the other kind. I answered all of them with the same measured patience I had brought to every difficult conversation in the past 2 months, which was the patience of a woman who had already survived the worst thing the room could throw at her and was therefore no longer afraid of the room. At the end, a board member named Robert Chu, one of Marcus's additions, a man I had assessed quickly as practical rather than loyal, leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, I want to ask something directly if that's acceptable." "It's always acceptable," I said. "Do you believe the company can recover from this? From the reputational exposure, the fraud investigation, the uncertainty of the past months?" I looked at him. "I built this company from nothing in an era when no one believed I could. I have rebuilt my own life from a basement room with a broken heating vent. I am not particularly concerned about the company's ability to recover." I paused. "The more important question is whether the people in this room are willing to do the work of rebuilding it correctly rather than quickly. Those are different projects." Robert Chu looked at me for a moment, then he nodded. "Fair point," he said. We took a vote on the transitional structure at 11:45. It passed 6-1. The one dissenting vote was from a board member who I suspected had his own complicated relationship with the question of accountability, and whose tenure on the board I intended to examine more carefully once the immediate situation had stabilized. I drove home in the January cold and picked Noah up from school at 3:15, which I had started doing on the days his after-school program didn't run, because I had discovered, in the way you discover things that seem obvious in retrospect, that the 45 minutes between school pickup and getting home were some of the best 45 minutes of my week. He talked in the car, unprompted, unsolicited, with the free associative energy of a child decompressing from a day of being structured, about his teacher, about a kid at lunch who had done something funny, about a book he was reading, about whether it was possible for a dog to learn to open a refrigerator. I drove and listened and asked the questions that kept it going, and it was not complicated and it was not fraught, and it was, in the specific way of unremarkable things, the best part of my day. Marcus entered a guilty plea in March, not October. March. His attorney, after what Gerald described as an extended and apparently unpleasant negotiation, had reached an agreement with the state's attorney's office in which Marcus pleaded guilty to 2 counts of fraud and one count of misappropriation of trust assets in exchange for a reduced sentence recommendation and the dropping of the obstruction count. The Financial Crimes Division kept the full fraud count, which was what they had insisted on from the beginning. Gerald called me the morning it was finalized. I was in the study when the phone rang, sitting at the desk from storage with a cup of tea going cold beside me, the way tea always went cold when I was working, because I could never remember to drink it while it was still warm, a failure of attention I had accepted as structural at this point in my life. "It's done," Gerald said. I set down the paper I had been reading. "How does he look?" A pause. Gerald understood the question, not legally, but humanly. "Tired," he said. His attorney says the past 4 months have been difficult. Celeste's case is still separate. Her attorney is still contesting the child endangerment count. Will she succeed? Unlikely, given the welfare report and the documented video production. But it will take longer. He paused again. Marcus will be sentenced in May. The recommendation is 2 to 4 years, with eligibility for early release at 18 months, depending on conduct. 2 to 4 years. I sat with that number. Not with satisfaction, not with grief exactly, but with the specific weight of a consequence that is both too much and not enough at the same time, which is the weight of most real consequences when you are honest about them. 2 to 4 years was not nothing. It was also not the full accounting of what had been done, to the company, to me, to an 8-year-old boy who had been placed in front of a camera and given words that were not his. Consequences rarely match the damage they are meant to address. That is one of the things no one tells you about justice, that it is real and necessary and incomplete all at once, and you have to make peace with the incompleteness without letting it undermine your belief in the necessity. And Celeste's relationship with Noah going forward? I asked. That's a family court matter, separate from the criminal case. The welfare determination will factor in. Given what's on record, supervised visitation is the most likely near-term arrangement. He paused. Noah's therapist has been involved in that assessment. Noah had started seeing a therapist in January, a woman named Dr. Sandra Price, who worked specifically with children navigating family disruption, and who Noah referred to simply as the lady with the plants, because her office had, by Noah's count, 14 plants, and he had opinions about this. He went on Wednesday afternoons. He had not volunteered much about what they talked about, which Dr. Price had said was entirely normal, and not a cause for concern. The children often processed most efficiently when they were not required to report on the processing. What I had noticed was that the careful practice disappearing, that particular quality of making himself smaller when adults around him became unpredictable, had been loosening, slowly, the way ice loosens in a late winter that is not yet warm but is no longer as cold. He still had bad nights occasionally. He would come downstairs and find me in the kitchen. I kept odd hours, always had. And he would not say much, just occupy the space beside me with the unself-conscious ease of a child who has decided that a place is safe. I would make him warm milk, which he accepted without the eye roll that 8-year-olds typically reserve for things they considered babyish. And we would sit at the kitchen table and he would talk or not talk, and either was fine, and eventually he would go back upstairs and sleep. I did not fix him. I want to be precise about that. You cannot fix a child who has been used as a tool by the people who are supposed to protect him. You cannot undo what was done in that blue curtain room. What you can do, the only thing you can actually do, is be the unchanging thing. The thing that is there when he comes downstairs. The thing that does not require anything from him in return for its presence. The warm milk thing. The kitchen table thing. The same thing every time thing. That was what I had to offer. It was not impressive. It was not the kind of love that announces itself. But it was there every day in the same form, and I had learned that, finally, at 71, after a lifetime of believing that love should be visible to count, that the loves that hold are the ones that do not move. Celeste pleaded no contest to a reduced charge in April. No prison time, community service, a fine, a permanent record. Her attorney had worked the child endangerment count down to a lesser charge that would not result in incarceration, and Celeste accepted it with, Gerald said, the same composed, strategic composure she brought to everything. She moved out of the house that was no longer hers, had never technically been hers, though she had treated it as such for years, in early April into an apartment across the city that I knew about only because Gerald's office received the forwarding address for legal correspondence. The divorce between Marcus and Celeste was filed in February, before either criminal case was resolved. That had surprised me, though perhaps it should not have. Marcus and Celeste had always been, at their core, an arrangement. Two people who had found in each other not love exactly, but a mutual utility, a shared orientation toward acquisition and appearance that had functioned as a marriage until the acquisition was gone and the appearance was no longer sustainable. Without those two things holding the structure in place, there was apparently nothing underneath. I thought about that sometimes. About what it would be like to dismantle your marriage alongside everything else, to lose the person you had constructed your daily life around at the same moment you were losing everything else. I did not think about it with sympathy exactly. Marcus had made his choices with full knowledge of what he was doing, and Celeste had made hers alongside him. But I thought about it with the recognition of a woman who has lost things and knows how weight accumulates, how one loss destabilizes the structure around all the others, how you can end up standing in the rubble of an entire life in what feels like a single moment, even though it took years to build toward. I did not wish either of them destruction. I want to be honest about that. What I wished was consequence and correction, not the same thing. Destruction belongs to no one. Consequence is simply the architecture of cause and effect doing what it was always going to do when you interfere with it long enough. May arrived, and with it, Marcus's sentencing. I did not attend. Gerald attended, and Miriam and the state's attorney's team, and a row of seats for the press that I was told was fuller than anticipated because the story had gotten out, not the version I would have chosen, with the particular editorial spin that journalism applies to anything involving money and family and betrayal, but out nonetheless. The story of the CEO who lost an empire his mother had built and given him. The story of the hidden trust clause. The story of the basement. I was home with Noah. It was a Wednesday, which meant Dr. Price in the afternoon, and I picked him up from school at 3:15 as I had been doing since January, and we drove home in the May warmth with the windows cracked, and Noah talking about a science project involving the water cycle and whether clouds were technically a form of storage, which was the kind of question I had learned to engage with fully because it mattered to him, and because the habit of full engagement was one of the things I was trying to build into the texture of his daily life. The experience of being taken seriously when you wondered out loud. Gerald called at 4:30. Noah was at Dr. Price's. I was in the study. 3 years, Gerald said, with eligibility for early release at 14 months given the plea agreement and no prior record. He'll serve at the county correctional facility. I said nothing for a moment. He addressed the court before sentencing, Gerald said. His attorney had prepared a statement. He talked about pressure and about bad decisions and about the people he had hurt. A pause. He mentioned you. He said your name. What did he say? He said he was sorry. Gerald's voice was careful, the way it was careful when he was delivering something that required me to do my own work with it. He said he had spent a long time making his success more important than his integrity, and that he had hurt the person who gave him everything, and that he was, those were his words, genuinely sorry. I sat with that, the word genuinely, the impossible question of whether it was true, and the larger question of whether the truth of it, either way, changed anything about what had been done. Did it seem genuine? I asked. Gerald was quiet for a moment. It seemed like a man who had lost everything and was standing in the rubble of it, he said finally. Whether that produces genuine remorse or only the performance of it, I'm not sure anyone can know that from the outside. No, I said. I don't suppose they can. After Gerald hung up, I sat in the study for a long time without doing anything. The May light through the window was different from the November and December and January and March light I had been sitting with, warmer, more present, the kind of light that makes a room look like something worth being in. The oak tree had leafed out entirely, full and dense and ordinary in the way of things that have simply done what they do without requiring anyone to notice. I thought about Marcus at 11 years old, climbing into the chair beside me in the kitchen at night when he couldn't sleep, putting his head on my arm without asking permission. I thought about him at 23, calling from Denver, his voice alive with the excitement of a contract almost closed, I thought about him standing in the doorway of my basement room with his shirt half tucked and his face stripped of its usual armor, saying, "What did you do?" And underneath that question, if you knew how to listen, the older question, why wasn't I enough for you to want to protect? I had asked myself that question many times in the months since. Not as accusation against myself, I had learned over a long and difficult winter to stop accepting accusations that were not mine to carry, but as genuine inquiry. Because the thing that made Marcus what he became was not simply greed or calculation or the slow substitution of appearance for substance. It was something that had started earlier, something that had grown in the space between what I gave him and what he felt entitled to. And I had not always known how to see that space or what to put into it. I was not responsible for who Marcus chose to become, but I was not entirely without a role in the conditions that shaped the choosing. That was the hardest thing I sat with. Not guilt, but the more nuanced thing, the thing that requires you to hold complexity without resolving it into something simpler and more comfortable. The thing that requires you to say, I loved him well, and I made mistakes, and both of those things are true, and neither one cancels the other. I did not arrive at peace with this. I want to be accurate. I arrived at a kind of ongoing relationship with the complexity of it, the ability to sit with it without it undoing me. That is not peace. It is something more durable than peace, because it does not depend on the complexity resolving. In June, I did something I had not done in 4 years. I drove to the cemetery where my husband was buried, a quiet place on the east side of the city, the kind of cemetery that had old trees and uneven ground, and the particular atmosphere of a place where people go to say things they cannot say anywhere else. I had not been since the year Marcus took over the company, when I had gone to tell my husband about the transfer and found, standing at the grave, that I had nothing certain to say, only questions, and a feeling that I was handing something to someone who would not hold it the way I had. I stood there for a while in the June warmth, and I talked, which I do not do in the theatrical sense, but in the quiet, interior sense of a person sorting through thoughts in the presence of someone they trusted. I told him about the basement. I told him about the birthday party and the $50 bond and Gerald's phone call at 11:17. I told him about Noah, about the cereal with the blue box, about the library book on the hallway table, about Wednesday afternoons and the lady with the plants. I told him about the oak tree, which he had planted and which was now, 31 years later, the thing I looked at when I needed proof that patient things could grow large. I told him that I was sorry it had come to this, and that I had done the best I could with what I had, and that the best I could had been, in the end, enough. Not for Marcus, not in the way I had hoped, but for the child who still had a chance, and that was the bet I had always been making even when I had not known I was making it. I drove home and picked up Noah from school. Summer session, a choice he had made himself, a science and engineering program that met 3 mornings a week, which he had asked about with the specific purposeful energy of a child who has found something that engages him at a cellular level. And he got in the car with a foam model of something that looked like a bridge, and explained it to me for the entire drive home with the complete confidence of a person who does not yet know that not everyone finds foam bridge models interesting, and therefore has not yet developed the social reflex of checking. I found it interesting. I asked questions. He answered them at length. We ate dinner at the kitchen table, and afterward I did the dishes, and he sat on the counter the way he had started doing, but just sat there while I washed, talking or not talking, keeping company in the way that only children and very old friends can keep company, without agenda, without the social performance of togetherness. I had stopped minding the counter sitting after the first week. Now I would have minded if he stopped. Debt. In July, I sat down with Noah for a conversation I had been thinking about for months. Not because it was the right time in any structural sense. There is no right time for conversations like this, only less wrong ones. But because he was settling in a way I could see, the gradual untensing of a child who has begun to believe that the ground will continue to be there. And I thought that certain things should be said while the settling was still in progress, while the words could land into something that was becoming stable, rather than into something that was still deciding. We were at the kitchen table after dinner, his homework half finished, my reading glasses on, the comfortable domestic clutter of a house that is actually lived in rather than staged for an audience. He was drawing something in the margin of his worksheet, which I had chosen not to address because the drawing was clearly a bridge variation and the worksheet was only half the problem. "Noah," I said. He looked up. "I want to talk to you about something." He put his pencil down. That still moved me. The way he gave me his full attention when I asked for it, the complete present tense arrival of him. Children who feel safe do that. Children who have spent a long time monitoring adults for cues about what is about to happen do the opposite. They watch from the side. They keep part of themselves held back. That Noah put his pencil down and looked at me directly was one of the small things I noticed and did not comment on and was grateful for every time. "I want to give you this," I said. I placed the small blue envelope on the table between us. He looked at it. He recognized it. I could see the recognition moving through his face, the slight change in his eyes. He had seen this envelope once before, at a birthday table, in a moment that had preceded a great deal of pain. "Your bond?" he said. "Your bond?" I said. "It was always yours. I just held on to it for a while." He picked it up. He turned it over the way he had turned it over at the birthday table, carefully, with both hands, the way he handled things he understood to be meaningful even when he was not yet sure why. "It's worth more now," I said. "It's been accumulating since I bought it. That's what bonds do. They grow in the waiting." I paused. "I know your dad said it was worthless." Noah's face did something complicated at that. He was 8. He was also, in the specific way of children who have been through things older than 8, in the ways that are not visible but are very real. "He was wrong," I said, simply. Without drama, without elaboration. Noah looked at the envelope for another moment. Then he looked up at me. "Grandma Evie," he said, "was it really never about the money?" I looked at him. 8 years old, asking me that. With his pencil down and his full attention and the bridge drawing half finished in the margin of his homework, because the bridge could wait, but this could not. "It was never about the money," I said. "The money is real, and it will grow, and someday it will be useful to you. But what it actually is the time between when I bought it and when you'll use it. It's all the years of it sitting there, growing in the dark, waiting for you to need it." I paused. "I wanted you to have something that worked that way, that didn't need to be seen to be real." He turned the envelope over in his hands one more time. Then he set it carefully on the table beside his worksheet, not in his pocket, not put away. Set it where he could see it, the way you set something you want to keep looking at. "Okay," he said. Then he picked up his pencil and went back to the bridge drawing. I took my reading glasses off and sat at the kitchen table in the July evening light and listened to the pencil moving on paper and the refrigerator's low hum and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower and the house settling around us the way houses settle when they are full of the right things. I want to talk to you now, not as Evelyn Whitmore, not as the narrator of this story, but as the person behind it, the one who has been sitting with all of this long enough to have arrived at something worth passing on. I'm going to tell you what I actually believe, not what sounds good, not the clean version, the true version, which is messier and more durable. I believe that the most dangerous thing that can happen to a person is not the obvious betrayal. It is not the loud humiliation, the public cruelty, the moment when someone holds up your love in front of 40 people and laughs at it. That hurts. It hurts in ways that do not fully go away. But you can see it. You can name it. You can point at it and say, that is the thing that was done to me. The most dangerous thing is the slow one. The one that happens in increments so small that each individual increment seems tolerable, seems like perhaps an overreaction to resist. The diminishment that comes not as a single blow, but as a series of adjustments, a smaller room, a lower table, a shorter list of things you are permitted to want. The erosion that works by making you complicit in your own shrinking, because the alternative is a confrontation you tell yourself you are not ready for. Not yet. Maybe next time. Maybe when things settle. I lived in a basement for 11 months. Not because I was forced, in the physical sense, because I had spent a lifetime learning to absorb, and accommodation had become so habitual that I could not clearly see, until the night of a birthday party and a $50 bond held up like evidence of my inadequacy, that accommodation had long since crossed the line into self-erasure. There's a difference between patience and disappearing. I had spent 11 months confusing them. I also want to tell you this. The trap that I walked into with Marcus was not that I loved him too much. I want to be careful about that framing because it implies that love itself was the error, and I do not believe that. Love is not the problem. Love without conditions is not the problem. What was the problem? What is always the problem? In every version of this story that plays out in families and partnerships and institutions across the world, was that I extended trust without requiring it to be maintained. I gave without building in the mechanism of accountability. I handed the keys and did not follow up on the driving until the car was already in the ditch. Love without accountability is not generosity. It is, over time, an enablement. An enablement, however well-intentioned, does not help the person you enable. It helps them remain comfortable in patterns that are costing them the very thing they most need, the experience of consequence, which is the only teacher that actually changes behavior. Marcus needed to be accountable long before I made him accountable. The failure to require it earlier, that is the thing I carry, not guilt. I have put the guilt down because guilt is not productive, and I do not have the years to waste on it, but I carry the recognition of it. I carry the lesson. I want to tell you something about older people, about the members of any family who are deemed by the younger and louder and more economically active members to be past their useful date, about the quiet ones, the ones in the corner chairs, the ones who have stopped arguing because the arguing never produced anything, and because they are tired in a way that is not physical, but is the specific fatigue of a person who has been told in 1,000 small ways that their era is over. Those people are not finished. That is the lie that comfortable children tell themselves about their parents and their grandparents, and anyone who does not perform their value loudly enough to be impossible to dismiss. Those people have built things. Those people have survived things. Those people have accumulated, in the years that the young consider wasted, a form of knowledge that cannot be downloaded or optimized or disrupted. The knowledge that comes from having actually lived through consequences, from having been wrong about important things and survived being wrong, from having loved badly and learned something and loved again. What was done to me in that house was not simply personal. It was the acting out of a cultural assumption that age is subtraction, that wisdom without current productivity is sentimentality, that a woman past a certain point has become a liability rather than the foundation on which everything currently standing was built. I am telling you, do not believe that assumption. Not about yourself, not about the people in your life who are older and quieter, and perhaps no longer performing. The foundation does not disappear because you stop looking at it. The roots do not stop holding because the season has taken the leaves. And I want to tell you this about children, about Noah specifically, but also about every child who exists in a family where the adults are conducting their wars, financial, emotional, territorial, with insufficient regard for the small people who must live inside the weather those wars produce. Children are not resilient in the way the word is commonly used. The word resilient has been weaponized into an excuse. Children are resilient, they'll be fine, they don't really understand what's happening. This is the reassurance adults give each other to avoid the discomfort of truly attending to what they are doing in the presence of a child. Children understand everything. They understand it not in language, but in the body, in the nervous system, in the specific calibration of their attention that tells them, before any word is spoken, whether the room is safe. They absorb the atmosphere of a home the way they absorb air, continuously, involuntarily, without being able to choose not to. What Noah absorbed in that house was not love. It was the performance of love, which is its own form of instruction, a lesson in how to be present without being real, how to give without meaning it, how to use the language of family while conducting the business of self-interest. He had been learning that lesson for 8 years. He had been sitting in a blue curtain room, putting his hands in his lap, waiting for the adults to finish. What I hope he is learning now, not from anything I have said, but from the daily evidence of an unchanged presence, a warm milk kitchen table, a real question about a foam bridge model, is the other lesson, the one that lasts longer, that some things do not move, that some people will be there when you come downstairs, that the love that holds is the love that does not require you to perform in order to receive it. That is the only thing I know how to give him, I am giving it every day. The summer settled into fall. Noah started third grade and chose, after 2 weeks of deliberation that he conducted largely aloud in the kitchen, a project on structural engineering for the school science fair. Dr. Price reported in a September check-in with Gerald's family law contact that Noah was progressing well. Those were her words. Progressing well, which is clinical language for what I observed as the simple, unremarkable evidence of a child who was slowly becoming less afraid. The board of Whitmore Holdings announced in September the appointment of a new CEO, a woman named Diana Cho, 44, with a background in operational turnaround and a reputation, Gerald told me, for building institutional cultures that did not depend on any single person's authority to function. I had been involved in the selection process from the chair position, and I had voted for Diana Cho because she had answered the hardest question I asked in the final interview. What is the first thing you do when you discover that someone you trusted has been lying to you, without hesitation and without performance? She had said, I document everything. Then I decide what the company needs, not what I feel. Then I make the decision and I stand in it. I had hired her on the basis of that answer, not because it was the answer I would have given, but because it was honest in a way that did not require me to provide context for what she would be walking into. Marcus's early release eligibility came in the following spring, 14 months after sentencing. Gerald called to tell me, and I received the information with the same complicated weight I had been carrying since March, the weight that was neither satisfaction nor grief, but the durable thing between them. I did not know whether he would be released early. I did not know what he would be when he came out, whether 14 months and a consequence he had not believed would find him had produced anything real, or whether it had only produced a more practiced version of the same performance in a different register. I could not know that from here. I could not know it from anywhere. The inside of another person is not a place you can audit, however good your documentation. What I had decided, what I had been sitting with since the May sentencing and had arrived at slowly, without rushing, in the way of decisions you make with your whole self rather than just the part of yourself that wants the pain to stop, was that I would not close the door. I was not leaving it open in the way of someone waiting to be hurt again. I was leaving it open in the way of someone who believes that a door should be a decision made in the present, not a wound sealed permanently against any possible future. Marcus had been my son before he was anything else. Whatever he had done, and I did not minimize what he had done, would never minimize it, carried the full knowledge of it without softening. He had also once been the child who could not sleep and came to find me in the kitchen, who put his head on my arm without asking permission. Those two things existed simultaneously in the same person. People are almost never only the worst version of themselves. They are also almost never only the best. The work of loving someone, the real work, the hard work, the work that costs you something, is holding both versions in your hands without dropping the one you need to hold to protect yourself. What I held was this. I would not pursue him. I would not reach out, would not extend the first gesture, would not put myself back in a position that required me to absorb in order to maintain a relationship. But if he arrived, if he came to the door I had not locked, I would open it and see who was standing there, and I would make my decision based on what I actually saw, rather than on what I feared or hoped. That was all I could offer. It was perhaps more than he had earned, but I'm 71 years old and I have learned that what we offer does not always need to be earned to be worth offering. Set. On a Sunday morning in October, a year, almost exactly, from Noah's birthday party, from the moment Marcus held up a $50 bond in front of 40 people and laughed, Noah came downstairs and found me at the kitchen table with the newspaper and a cup of tea that was, as usual, already cold. He got his cereal. He got the blue box cereal, which I had continued buying every week without comment. He sat across from me and ate it with the focused attention he brought to breakfast, which was the same attention he brought to bridge models and science projects, and the question of whether clouds were technically a form of storage, the full-body presence of a child who had not yet learned to eat while doing something else. After a while, he said, "Grandma Evie." "Yeah." "Do you think my dad is okay?" I set down the newspaper. I looked at him. This child. This 8 soon-to-be 9-year-old with his dark eyes and his unbrushed morning hair, and the question he had just asked with the direct, unprotected openness of a person who has decided to trust you with something real. I thought about what to say. I thought about all the things it would be easy to say, and all the ways those easy things would fail him, would answer the surface of the question instead of the thing underneath it, which was not really a question about Marcus's well-being, but about whether it was allowed to still love your father when your father had done the things his father had done, whether that made you complicit or naive or disloyal to yourself. I think he's going through something hard, I said. And I think hard things can change people, if the person is willing to let them. I paused. I don't know yet whether your dad is willing. I don't think he knows yet either. Noah thought about that for a moment, his spoon in his bowl. Is it okay that I miss him sometimes? It's not just okay, I said. It's right. He's your father. Missing him is the correct response to him not being here. Even though he did bad stuff? People can do bad things and still be someone you love, I said. That's one of the hardest things about being a person. It doesn't mean you pretend the bad things didn't happen. It means you hold both at the same time. Noah processed this with the serious, unhurried deliberation I had come to recognize as his particular mode of engaging with difficult things. He did not rush toward a conclusion. He sat with it. That sounds really hard, he said finally. It is, I said. It gets easier with practice. Not easy, just easier. He nodded, the way he nodded when he had received information he intended to keep. Then he went back to his cereal. I picked up my newspaper. The October morning light was coming through the kitchen window at the angle that turned everything briefly gold, and the tea was cold, and the house was quiet in the way it had become quiet. Lived in, 2 people quiet. A quiet with cereal bowls and bridge models and library books, and the specific warmth of a place where someone will come downstairs in the morning and you will not be alone. I thought about what I would say to you, if I could say anything. After all of it, the birthday table in the basement, and the accordion file, and the parking lot and the courtroom, and the December kitchen floor and everything in between, I would say, do not wait. Do not wait until the basement to understand what the basement means. Do not wait until you are sitting in a chair at an ankle-level window watching Roots before you decide that you are worth more than the space someone else has decided to give you. Do not wait until the insult is public and the audience is 40 people before you understand that the private insults were also real and also deserved a response, and also cost you something you had the right to protect. I would say, the things you build are yours. The love you give does not obligate you to give everything, does not mean you owe anyone access to whatever is left of you after the giving. Generosity is a choice. It should remain a choice. The moment it becomes a debt, the moment someone begins to treat your love as something they are owed rather than something they are grateful for, you have the right, and sometimes the responsibility, to close the account. I would say the people who dismiss you because of your age, your gender, your quietness, your willingness to absorb, they are making a calculation based on incomplete information. Let them make it. Let them proceed on the assumption that you are what they have decided you are. And then, when the moment arrives, not in anger, not in performance, but with the steady, documented patience of someone who has been preparing for longer than they knew, show them what was actually in the file. I would say, the child in your life, whether it is your grandchild or your child or the child of someone you love, that child is not resilient. That child needs you to be the unchanged thing, the warm milk thing, the same thing every time thing. Give them that. Give them the experience of a presence that does not require performance in return. It is the most important thing you will ever do. And it will not look like much from the outside, and it will matter more than anything that does. And I would say, the best things grow slowly. I know that sounds like something you put on a card, and yes, I did put it on a card, and yes, I stand behind it completely, because it is true in the way that only simple things are true, the way that only the things we have had to learn through loss and time and the long patience of watching roots work in the dark tend to be true. The oak tree in the window was planted by a man who is gone, in a year when I was not yet who I would become. In the ground of a house, I would lose and reclaim and lose again and reclaim again before I understood that the house was never really the point. It is taller than the roofline now. It shades the study window in summer and stands bare in winter, and does nothing else except be itself, completely, in every season, without apology and without requiring anyone to notice. I am trying to be more like that tree. I am a 71-year-old woman who spent 11 months in a basement and came back up. I am the woman they underestimated, and I am the woman who carries the cost of what she had to do to protect herself and her grandson. And I am the woman sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning in October with cold tea and a newspaper and a child eating cereal across from her. And I am all of those things at once, unresolved, ongoing, still here. That is the story. All of it. The parts that were my fault and the parts that were not, and the parts that are still being decided. I would not trade it. Not even the basement, not even the birthday table, not even the 4 minutes on the stairs, because every piece of it led me here. To this kitchen, this morning, this child. To the beginning of what I now understand was always the real work. Not the empire. Never the empire. This.